Chapter 1302. Of course, Harden Barter didn't doubt Daiqin's loyalty. After all, during this period of time, this person had been supporting him. If this person had already surrendered to the 5-star army, the situation would have been much worse. Harden Barter didn't doubt Daiqin, he just said this out of anger. But after he said this, what he didn't expect was that Daiqin actually admitted to it. He first nodded and then said with a very certain tone, "Yes, Your Majesty, your servant has already surrendered to the 5-star army. Now the 5-star army has already disguised themselves as the Kazakh army and entered the city. This time, your servant came to persuade Your Majesty to surrender. Please don't fight for the sake of the soldiers and the people. Otherwise you will only lose more miserably, and even lose your life." As if he was afraid that Harden Barter wouldn't give him a chance to speak, Daiqin spoke very quickly and clearly. He could guarantee that he would say everything he wanted to say in a very short period of time. Harden Barter could also hear it very clearly. This was also a test for people. And with every sentence that Daiqin said, Harden Barter's face became more and more ugly. When Daiqin finished speaking, his face was already as gloomy as water. His murderous eyes stared at Daiqin again, and again, as if he wanted to get to know this person again. Then he suddenly roared, "Innocent? How can there be innocent people in a war? Since they are the generals and citizens of Turkmenistan, they should protect this country with this king. If this king is no longer here, there is no need for them to continue living. You, on the other hand, have been put in an important position by this king, but now you are actually helping others. How disappointing." After saying this, Harden Barter suddenly raised his right hand and pointed at Daiqin. "You are a person without a king or father. Come, take down this cowardly person for this king." Yes. The 8 palace guards standing on the left and right of the palace immediately responded, and rushed towards where Daiqin was standing. Just as they started to move, a short wooden table flew over, and blocked the path of the imperial bodyguards. Naturally, it was Thorgen who did it. He had been observing the environment in the hall, and was prepared to make a move at any time. Just as the guards agreed, he stared at the small wooden table that was originally prepared for Kelly. He reached out with both hands, picked it up, and threw it out with force. Taking advantage of the flying wooden table, Thorgen grabbed Daiqin's hand and quickly retreated until he reached the main door of the palace and kicked it open. 2 silhouettes also quickly rushed out. "Catch them, we can't let them escape." Seeing that Daiqin and the other person were about to escape, Harden Barter's eyes turned red as if they were spitting fire. Under his shouts, the 8 palace guards rushed out together. At this moment, Lei Chuan, who was in charge of receiving them from outside the palace, was also prepared. The moment he saw Daiqin and the other person rush out, he pulled out his sword and slashed towards the palace guard closest to him, who was completely defenseless. As Lei Chuanding made his move, it was like a signal. The dozens of warriors behind him all pulled out their swords and rushed towards different targets. In an instant, blood splashed everywhere and the palace became a mess. "Let's go." Thorgen quickly pulled Daiqin back to Lei Chuandang's side, and took a sword from him, holding it horizontally in front of him as he yelled. Lei Chuandang didn't need Thorgen to say anything to know that they couldn't stay here any longer, because in his vision, there were already countless guards rushing towards them. He slashed forward with his sword and pushed back a palace guard. At the same time he shouted to all his subordinates, "Retreat, kill a path of blood." "Kill," the dozens of warriors said in unison. Then, they turned around and retreated according to the path they came from. At this moment, not only in the courtyard, but also at the 3 gates of the palace, it was already a mess. Along the way, Lei Chuandang's group had more than 100 brothers at the gates of the top 3 academies. There were exactly 60 people at each intersection. When chaos broke out in the palace, these 180 warriors immediately pulled out their blades and slashed at the palace guards beside them. Taking advantage of the chaos, Lei Chuan and his men charged out of the courtyard, and arrived in front of the first gate. They met up with the soldiers of the 5-star army, and continued to charge out. With every step they took, someone would fall beside them. With every step they took, there would be a palace guard who would be killed by a blade. "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and chase after them." Seeing that Daiqin still hadn't arrived in front of him, Harden Barter felt that something was wrong. With a face full of anger, he yelled at Tushi and Jinjel who were standing at the two sides. Yes. The two generals seemed to have just woken up. They replied loudly and prepared to leave. Wait. Harden Barter's yell caused the two to involuntarily stop. What did Daichin just say? He said that the 5-star army disguised themselves as Kazakh cavalry and already infiltrated the city? Doesn't this mean that the city is no longer safe? You two don't need to chase anymore. This king will give you the tiger troop talisman. Immediately dispatch the troops and kill all the Kazakh cavalry that just entered the city. Hurry. As he spoke, Harden Barter reached into his pocket and took out 2 tiger troop talismans. He gave them to Tushi and Jinjel. The two generals bowed and quickly left after receiving the tiger troop talismans. However, at this moment, Harden Barter, who was extremely angry, didn't think too much about it. Even if Daichin could betray him, were these two generals really that trustworthy? Were they really that loyal? Battle cries rang out from the palace. The 5-star army soldiers who were already prepared outside the palace seemed to have heard a signal. They all shouted loudly and then rushed over with swords and spears. They quickly opened the palace gates and received Lei Chuandang and the others. At this time, the Turpan soldiers who received the news gathered more and more troops to protect their king. Retreat from here first and regroup with the army at the south gate. We will make a decision then. After Lei Chuandang met up with the soldiers, he immediately gave the order. The group of people quickly left this place. Right after they left, Tushi and Jinjel each brought a group of soldiers and appeared here. However, they didn't have the intention to chase after Daichin. Instead, they split up and went towards the east and west barracks. Tushi really went to mobilize troops. He was once a defeated general and Harden Barter didn't abandon him. Naturally, he was very loyal and wanted to show off. However, the other general, Jinjel, didn't think so. It wasn't that he wasn't loyal enough. On the contrary, he was very loyal. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been chosen by Daichin and promoted. Yes, Jinjel was the one who was promoted by General Daichin. It was because of this that he was greatly affected by what happened in the palace just now. According to his understanding, his benefactor, Daichin, was a reasonable person and a person who loved his soldiers. Since even he thought that he would lose this battle, he had no choice but to think about the future. Everyone was afraid of death, not to mention a meaningless death. Jinjel was also afraid of death. However, if it was on the battlefield and his skills were inferior, he would die without regrets. However, if he were to die in such a muddle-headed manner, and even be scolded after his death, such a death was not something he wanted to see. Gejiner's footsteps became slower and slower as he walked towards the east camp. After hurriedly passing through 2 more streets, he suddenly stopped and looked at his most trusted bodyguard beside him and asked, Are you afraid of death?" The soldier was stunned by this question. After a moment of hesitation, he immediately shook his head. "General, I'm not afraid of death." "Good, then I'll give you a mission. Go quickly." Lei Chuandang and his group had already retreated to the south gate under the protection of the 5-star army cavalry. There were soldiers of the new army everywhere. Retreating here also meant that they were safe. Suhi saw how embarrassed they were and knew that persuasion wouldn't work. He shook his head and said, "It seems that your mission has failed. Since it's like this, then we can only fight. General Daichin, this time you have nothing to say." Daichin's face was red. He wanted to say something, but the matter of persuading the king had already failed. In order to protect him, he had also lost dozens of 5-star army brothers. At this moment, he really didn't know what to say. Sometimes silence was a kind of silent agreement. General Suhi nodded. "Good, since it's like this, immediately use the radio to contact the 4th Army Regiment outside the North Gate. Tell them to prepare to bombard the gate and kill our way into the city. When the time comes, we'll kill our way to the north and south." "Yes, sir." After hearing Suhi's order, the soldiers immediately responded loudly and turned to leave the tent. At this moment, the tent flap opened and a messenger walked in. He looked at Suhi and saluted, then said loudly, "General, there's a Turpan soldier outside the tent. He says he's Genjel's soldier and has important matters to discuss with General Daichin." "Genjel's soldier? Why don't you let him in?" Daiqin said as he looked at Suhi with a pleading expression. Suhi also wanted to see what this person wanted. He nodded and said, "Okay, let him in." Soon, under the guidance of the messenger, a soldier wearing a Torpon uniform walked into the tent. He first looked around and after seeing General Daiqin, he knelt down and said, "General, our general invites you to his camp. He says he has important matters to discuss." Chapter 1303. Daiqin had some impression of the soldier in front of him, and confirmed that he was someone who always followed beside Zhengzhou. After confirming his identity and knowing that he wanted to meet him, Daiqin quickly made a decision. He had already made his intentions very clear in the main hall just now, and Zhengzhou was also present at that time. He already knew of his opinion, and now he still wanted to meet him. What was the meaning of this? Could it be that he agreed with his opinion? Did he call me over this time just to discuss something related to this matter? In just a few breaths of time, Daiqin thought of many things and decided to take the risk. But just as he was about to nod his head, Suhi had already answered for him. "No, General Daiqin won't go. Who knows if your general is trying to trick us?" Right, you can't go. It's too dangerous." Suhi's words attracted everyone's agreement. This wasn't to say that everyone was trying to curry favor with him because of his high position, but this was what everyone truly thought. "No, I should go." Just when everyone was disagreeing, Daiqin opened his mouth with a determined look on his face. As if he was afraid that others would misunderstand or disagree, Daiqin explained, "This General Zhengzhou is different from the others. He was personally promoted by me and I know his personality well. He definitely wouldn't do something despicable like lying to others. I think he wants to join us and called me over to discuss something important. Now that I'm no longer around, the military authority of the East and West armies will definitely be given to these people. This is an army of tens of thousands. In order for these people to join the 5-star army, I think this risk is worth taking." Daiqin looked at Suhi as he spoke, his expression unwavering. Since he had already decided to stop the war and give more soldiers and civilians a way out, then he had to finish the good deed. Even if he had to die, he wouldn't hesitate. Since he had already taken the risk, Suhi originally didn't want to agree. After all, Daiqin was still of great use. There were 300,000 civilians and 100,000 soldiers in Farkashi City. It was impossible to kill them all. In the end, to pacify these people, the local general had to do the work. No matter if it was in terms of experience or influence, Daiqin was the best choice to settle these problems. Once something happened to him, a lot of things would be difficult to do. This was also why Yang Qindong ordered the CIA to spend a lot of effort to control Daiqin's family. From the looks of it, the effect was excellent. Not only was this person worried about the safety of his family, but he was also worried about the safety of the soldiers and civilians in the city. That was why he agreed to work for him. At this time, if something were to happen, wouldn't all their previous work be for nothing? At the same time, Suhi knew that Daiqin's words made sense. If Zhengzhou really wanted to surrender, it would be a pity to give up this opportunity. This meant that not only would they not have the cooperation of tens of thousands of soldiers, they would also have to face tens of thousands more enemies. The difference between the two was too great. Suhi was a bit hesitant, but Daiqin said firmly, "Commander Su, please give me a chance. Based on my understanding of Zhengzhou, even if he doesn't choose to surrender, he won't threaten my safety. Please believe me." "Then okay. Tell everyone to leave. I have something to tell you in private." Suhi finally agreed. Even if she agreed, if Zhengzhou also chose to surrender, she would have to give him some benefits and guarantees. This kind of thing was not suitable to be discussed in public. Instead, it needed to be discussed in private. After about 15 minutes, Daiqin walked out of the tent and left with the soldier. When he left, he only brought 4 bodyguards with him to protect his own safety. Because if the opponent had any bad intentions, it would be useless no matter how many soldiers he brought. "Commander, what should we do?" Seeing Daiqin leave, Lei Chuandang and the rest came to Suhi to ask for instructions. "Let's wait for a while." "Oh right, immediately send a message to the 1st Regiment of the 4th Division to not fire the cannons on the city gate. Wait for our news." So he decided to believe in Daiqin this time. Maybe he would bring back some good news. Even if things didn't work out, they had already entered the city and couldn't be kicked out. At most, they would just kill a few people. After Daiqin followed the soldier to the east camp, he saw Zhengzhou waiting for him at the entrance. When he saw that Daiqin not only came, but also only brought 4 soldiers with him, Zhengzhou's face revealed a trace of joy. When they came in front of him, he took the initiative to bow. Subordinate greets General. From Zhengzhou's greeting, one could see his attitude. To this, Daiqin also said emotionally, "General, please rise." "Thank you, General." Zhengzhou immediately stood up and said sincerely, "General, please come into the tent for a chat." "Okay, lead the way." Daiqin's body had already relaxed. If it was a blessing, it wouldn't be a disaster. If it was a disaster, it couldn't be avoided. Very quickly, the 2 of them entered the tent. When there were only the 2 of them in the tent, Zhengzhou knelt on the ground. "General, I didn't think that you would really come, and only bring 4 soldiers with you. Your trust in me makes me feel ashamed and touched. Quickly get up. Speaking of which, I was the one who promoted you. I think I know you well. Speak, this time you brought me here. Do you have something to say?" At this moment, Daiqin had already made up his mind. If the other party really wanted to harm him, there was no need for him to kneel now. Daiqin went straight to the point. Zhengzhou, who got up, didn't say anything. It was obvious that he was still thinking about how to start. After waiting for a while, Zhengzhou still didn't speak. Daiqin knew that he had to say something to increase the stakes. He said, "Okay, if you have something to say, then say it quickly. To be honest, the 5-star army didn't agree to you coming here. If you don't go back for a long time, I'm afraid that something will happen. At that time, it will be very bad for you." Zhengzhou, who was still hesitating, didn't dare to hesitate anymore. He opened his mouth and said, "General, did the 5-star army really enter the city?" Finally, they came to the main topic. Daiqin didn't hide anything and said, "That's right. They destroyed the 100,000 Kazakh cavalry and disguised themselves as them to enter the city. Now they have already taken over the south gate. We can't beat them away." What? The 100,000 Kazakh army was defeated? It was the first time he heard this news. After hearing it, Zhengzhou's face changed. Speaking of which, the 100,000 reinforcements were the hope of Turpan turning the situation around. He didn't think that even this hope would be destroyed. It seemed that he didn't have any other choice. Yes, I've already seen General Kelly. Think about it. Even he has become a captive of the 5-star army. The fate of the 100,000 reinforcements can be imagined. Daiqin nodded his head heavily, giving a clear answer on this point. After knowing the truth, Zhengzhou knew that the situation had changed. He was even more glad for his decision. Of course, he was also grateful to Daiqin. He originally thought that if he sent out an invitation, Daiqin wouldn't dare to come. If that was the case, then he didn't have any other choice. The only thing he could do was to listen to the king's orders and send out troops. But now, since Daiqin came, he obviously had another choice. "General, what do you think I should do next?" Although his question was a little vague, his words already expressed his thoughts. Daiqin was relieved after hearing it. "Zhengzhou, I've already reported your situation to the new army commander of the 5-star army. He arranged it like this." At this moment, Tushi was mobilizing troops in the west camp. Holding the military seal given by King Hardenbarter, he now had control over 70,000 troops. Originally, he had an army of 160,000. Other than the 5,000 outside the north and south gates, 10,000 inside the city, and 70,000 in the east camp, the 70,000 in his hands were the most important. When he thought about having such an important military power, General Tushi was very happy. He thought that his chance to show off had come. The opportunity to lose the Battle of Ayla Mountain Pass would also appear. But what he didn't expect was that this happiness didn't last for too long. It was interrupted when a scout entered the tent and reported, "General, the latest news, Zhengzhou surrendered to the 5-star army and sent people to open the north gate. Right now, the 5-star army outside the north gate has already entered the city." A portion of the cavalry is already charging towards our west camp. The scout knelt on the ground and reported anxiously. General Tushi, who was originally happy and wanted to make a big contribution, heard the news and his expression changed greatly. Genjul's surrender was tantamount to completely overturning the balance of strength on the battlefield, making it difficult for him to see any hope of victory. Now in Firlice City, the enemy had occupied 3 of the 4 cities. Only his west gate was still in his hands. He absolutely couldn't lose it. He couldn't afford to lose it. Like this, let the soldiers withdraw their forces and guard the gate. Don't worry about other places. If anyone wants to approach the west gate, just shoot them with bows and arrows. Also, immediately mobilize a group of troops. I'm going to the palace to pick up His Majesty and leave here immediately. After quickly making a decision, Tushi took a group of 2,000 elite cavalry and went straight to the palace from the west gate. He found King Hardenbarter, who was still sitting there and waiting for news. Time was of the essence. After Tushi saw King Harden, he knelt on the ground and gave a brief introduction of the situation. Then he said loudly, "Your Majesty, Firlice City is no longer safe. For your Majesty's safety, please follow me out of the city to take refuge." Chapter 1304. Genjul had also rebelled. This result struck Hardenbarter like a bolt of lightning. His face was as black as the bottom of a pot. The feeling of being betrayed by his friends and family made him feel like a ball of fire was burning in his heart, and he wanted to vent it. Damn it, they all deserve to die. This king has treated them well. Why did they betray me? General Tushi, why do you think this happened? Hardenbarter, who seemed to be a little neurotic, shouted for a long time. If it was any other time, in the face of the king's anger, Tushi could only kneel at the side and endure. But now, time waits for no one. He could tolerate the king's actions, but his enemies wouldn't. If he waited any longer, once the encirclement was completed, it would be impossible for him to escape. Tushi, who was kneeling on the ground, gritted his teeth and finally did something that shouldn't be done by a subject. But it was the most appropriate action. Come, lift His Majesty up and invite His Majesty out of the palace. This order made the cavalrymen who came with Tushi look at each other. They didn't dare to make any excessive moves in front of the crazy king. Instead, the palace guards approved of this order. They quickly rushed forward and lifted Hardenbarter up and rushed out of the palace. Leaving with them were the concubines of the imperial harem, as well as several young princes and princesses. Half an hour after Tushi left, Commander He led a large number of cavalrymen to the temporary palace. But at this time, the palace was empty and the king was nowhere to be seen. After a careful search, other than some palace maids who were kneeling and trembling in fear, there wasn't a single member of the royal family. General Daichin shook his head regretfully. It seems that His Majesty has left first. Left. Suhi shook his head and said in a very certain tone. They can't run away. Come, immediately interrogate these palace maids and ask them who took Hardenbarter away. Faced with the fierce-looking, burly and murderous new Third Army cavalry, the palace maids naturally answered all the questions. Soon, they told the story of Tushi's appearance here and taking the king away. This was within Suhi's expectations. When he heard that the king left, but because he left in a hurry, he left all his belongings in the palace. He called the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, Bai Kai, and told him to send a large number of troops to guard the palace. He also reported this matter to Yang Chendong outside the city. Then he said to the commander of the 3rd Cavalry Division, Lei Chuandang, immediately lead the army to attack the west gate. It's best if we can capture Hardenbarter, but if we can't, we have to drive them out of the city. When they get out of the city, there will naturally be people to stop them. In this way, Changbo of the 4th Cavalry Division attacked from the south gate, Lei Chuandang attacked from the palace to the west gate. Jenger's surrendered troops attacked from the east gate, and the 1st Regiment of the 4th Cavalry Division, and the Far Eastern Army Cavalry Division attacked from the north gate. At this point, apart from the west gate, most of the city was occupied by the 5-Star Army. At the west gate, Tushi forcefully took Hardenbarter back to the barracks. At this time, the young king's emotions had also gradually calmed down. Although he still had some doubts in his heart, Now was not the time to think about these things. What he had to do next was the most important thing. General Tushi, what do you plan to do next? After gradually calming down, Hardenbarter looked at Tushi, who was the last important official by his side, and asked with a hopeful expression, Your Majesty, I have 2 suggestions. The first is to stay in the city and use Your Majesty's name to fuse with the army to resist. We should strive to regain the command of the city and drive the 5-star army out of the city. However, this is not easy to accomplish. The second is to immediately leave the city. Where there is life, there is hope. As long as Your Majesty is still here, you can shake your arm at any time and rebuild the mountains and rivers. As for where we should go, Your Majesty, please make the final decision. Tushi cupped his fist and said carefully, The first suggestion was definitely a good one. Once the 5-star army was chased out of the city, it would be equivalent to resolving a crisis. With the 300,000 citizens in the city, perhaps they would be able to use them to form an army with a decent number of soldiers. However, it was obvious that with Daiqin and Genjil's betrayal, and the 5-star army's cavalry entering the city, it would be quite difficult to do this. If they did not do it well, they would be trapped here. And from the looks of it, this possibility was very high. Although the second suggestion was to give up a large number of civilians and even soldiers, if they wanted to break out, they couldn't bring too many soldiers. Firstly, they needed to leave people to guard the west gate. Secondly, if they had too many people, they would be a big target. The chances of them being discovered and caught would also be very high. In this way, it was equivalent to giving up too many things, which made one's heart ache. However, by doing this, they would be able to stay away from danger, and the chances of them rising would also be very high. After a moment of hesitation, Hardenbarter was worthy of being an ambitious king. He quickly made the decision to leave the city like a gecko cutting off its tail. Let's leave the city. Just like the general said, where there is life, there is hope. How about this? You go and make the arrangements. We don't need to bring too many cavalrymen. Only 5,000 elite cavalrymen will be enough. You also arrange for the other 3 groups of 2,000 cavalrymen to go out of the west gate with us. After that, we will go our separate ways to confuse the 5-star army's cavalrymen. Good, Your Majesty is wise. I will go and make the preparations. Tushi sighed at Hardenbarter's cleverness and immediately flattered him. Then he went to make the preparations. This plan involved selecting soldiers and convincing some generals to stay here. The workload wasn't small. Tushi busied himself for a while, and only managed to settle the matter after half an hour. When there were still some details to be completed, a piece of news came which made Tushi unable to sit still. He left the unfinished work and brought the selected 11,000 cavalrymen to Hardenbarter. Your Majesty, there's news from the periphery. A group of cavalrymen from the 5-star army has arrived at the western gate of the city. They're charging towards us right now. We need to leave immediately. Good, is everything done? Hardenbarter naturally knew that there was no time to lose. This time he didn't go crazy and didn't ask pretentiously. Everything is done. Among the 11,000 cavalry, we will leave 5,000 of the most elite cavalry to protect Your Majesty. The remaining 6,000 cavalry will be divided into 3 groups to confuse the enemy. Tushi answered very happily. That's great. Let's go. General Tushi, this king didn't misjudge you. Once this king returns here in the future, there will be many benefits for you. At that time, your entire family will be proud of your choice today. At this moment, Hardenbarter, who could only rely on Tushi, immediately made a heavy promise. In response, a look of excitement flashed across Tushi's face. He knelt down and said, The Tushi clan is willing to go through fire and water for Your Majesty's safety. We are willing to risk our lives for the re-emergence of Tolyafin. Haha, good, we will leave immediately. Hardenbarter laughed heartily. Although there were too many unexpected things this time, no matter what, as long as he could escape, there would be new hope. In this way, the rise of East Mountain wasn't impossible. At that time, he would retaliate against anyone who betrayed him by 10 times or even 100 times. He would let everyone know the consequences of offending him. Hardenbarter. The 11,000 cavalry quickly left the west gate under Tushi's arrangement. When this news reached the ears of the Torpon generals who were arranged to stay behind, many of them couldn't help but curse. After all, even the king and the general had left. They had become rootless trees. Facing the 5-star army coming from all directions, they would only die if they continued to resist. There were also some generals who had a contemplative look after hearing this news. As the saying goes, every man for himself, and the devil takes the hindmost. Even the king and the general had left. They also needed to plan and consider their future. Was it really a wise choice to lead their troops to resist the 5-star army? Tushi couldn't care less about the considerations of these generals. He led 5,000 cavalrymen to protect Hardenbarter, the royal family, and the core members of his family, and quickly left the city. He then waved his hand, and the other 3 groups of 2,000 cavalrymen, each left in different directions. At this point, no one knew which direction was safer. The so-called choice was just to resign themselves to fate. However, compared to the other soldiers who stayed in the city to fend off the 5-star army, it was clear that their chances of survival were higher. Looking at the 3 groups of 6,000 cavalry leaving in different directions, Tushi let out a long sigh and loudly issued the order to set off. They followed the previously planned route and went straight to Boston Lake in the west. As long as they could go around the lake, they would be able to enter the vast Kuruktag mountain range. Once they entered, they would be like birds flying in the sky. It would be difficult to find them. After Suhi's telegram was sent to Yang Qindong, he immediately ordered the light cavalry regiment of the 5-star army and the reconnaissance regiment, who were about to enter through the north gate, to go around the west gate and intercept Hardenbarter, who might escape through this route. Not only that, Yang Qindong, who was supposed to enter the city, also led 2,000 black cavalry from the south gate to the west gate, and joined in the pursuit and interception of Hardenbarter's escape. Beta Persei was somewhat worried about Yang Qindong's decision. They only had 2,000 black cavalry. They didn't know how many cavalry were protecting Hardenbarter. If the other party had too many people, would they be surrounded? Chapter 1305. Beta Persei couldn't help but say to Yang Qindong, "Young master, we only have 2,000 cavalry. You can't get involved so easily. Why? Don't you have confidence in the combat effectiveness of the black cavalry?" Yang Qindong looked sideways at Beta Persei. When he said this, he did not avoid it at all. Instead, his tone was a little heavier so that the black cavalry around him could hear it very clearly. At that moment, after the voice was heard, the black cavalry stared at Beta Persei with an unfriendly look. As Yang Qindong's personal guards, the black cavalry was an extremely arrogant existence. How could such an army tolerate being looked down upon and looked down upon by others? Even if the person who said this was Beta Persei, it still made them very angry. Being stared at like this made Yang Er feel like he was being cut by 1,000 blades. He bitterly smiled and said, "Young master, I don't dare to have such thoughts. I just think that for safety reasons, we can transfer some cavalry to complete this mission with us. For example, the 5th Regiment of the 1st Cavalry Division that hasn't entered the city yet. After all, one more person means one more force." With such an explanation, the murderous gazes became less fierce. Beta Persei could not help but wipe the cold sweat off his forehead. Just now, the momentum and pressure were so great that he almost couldn't bear it. Yang Qindong naturally understood Beta Persei, and knew that this was also for his own safety. He thought that only transferring the 5th Regiment would not affect the overall situation, and would not have any impact on cleaning up the city, so he nodded and agreed. "Well, go and arrange for Wangshan to report. Black cavalry, let's go. Let's go." The black cavalry shouted excitedly. After all, there was going to be a war soon, and those were all military merits. How could they not be excited? Just like that, when Hardenbarter sent out 3 feints to help him escape, Yang Qindong also arranged for 3 cavalry regiments to pursue. As for whether they could catch up or not, that would depend on luck. In the end, it was clear that Hardenbarter's luck was not good. After receiving the order, the scouting group, the light cavalry group, and the 5th World Cavalry Regiment found the 3 feint armies outside the west side of the city, a total of 6,000 cavalry. They easily killed over 1,000 people and learned that Hardened Barter had escaped with 5,000 cavalry. They reported this to Yang Chendong. The Black Cavalry's equipment was too heavy. In terms of speed, they were far slower than the other 3 cavalry units. That was why Yang Chendong had received this information before he even reached the battlefield. Afterward, he asked someone to bring him a map. After observing it for a while, his eyes fell on Boston Lake. In his opinion, if he was Hardened Barter, he would definitely choose to go around the lake. This was the best route. Come on, change direction. Don't go to the west gate, go to the lake. At the same time, send out cavalry scouts to expand the search area. At this moment, Hardened Barter naturally didn't know that the 3 cavalry units he sent out had been taken down. He didn't have a transcendental communication device like a radio station in his hands. Right now he was still walking around in the dark. It wasn't exactly casual. They still had a goal, and that was to go around Boston Lake. It was just that this lake was not small. They had already walked for more than 3 hours, but they were only halfway there. This was also because there were too many people holding them back. For example, the concubines of the royal family. They were women and weren't good at riding horses. At this moment, they were sitting in several carriages. Because of their presence, the speed of the team naturally slowed down. In this regard, Tushi was naturally anxious in his heart, but he didn't dare to say anything disrespectful. Not only were there concubines in the carriages, but there were also 3 little princes and 2 little princesses. They were existences that he couldn't afford to offend. The team walked like this, neither fast nor slow. But it seemed that good people were blessed by the heavens. They didn't encounter any enemies along the way. Seeing that the sky was already dark, they had already completed 4/5 of their goal of going around Boston Lake. It seemed that victory was in front of them. General Tushi, it's getting late. Should we find a place to rest? After all, we have been on the road for more than half a day. Everyone is a little tired. Hardened Barter, who insisted on riding on the horse and didn't sit in the carriage, asked with a face full of sweat. After all, he was a king. Staying in the palace every day and neglecting his training, he suddenly rushed for a few hours. Now he could only feel a tearing pain in the muscles of his legs. If it was not for the face of the king, he would have crawled into the carriage to enjoy the massage and care of the concubines. Naturally, Tushi had already seen Hardened Barter's performance on the horse. He had thought more than once about whether he should remind the king to get into the carriage to rest. However, considering that this might embarrass the king, it would not look good on his face, so he endured it. Now that he heard the king's words, he knew that the other party really couldn't endure it anymore. Considering that they didn't see the cavalry of the 5-star army chasing after them, there shouldn't be any problems. Tushi nodded and agreed. Okay, then we will stop and rest. Your Majesty, you also know that we haven't completely escaped to a safe place yet. Hardened Barter just wanted to rest. As for when they would set off, he didn't care. This was because he had already made up his mind. This time, he wouldn't come out of the carriage. He nodded and said, "Okay, I will listen to the general." Just like this, before they completely escaped from the dangerous area, the group stopped. This action also destroyed Hardened Barter's last hope and possibility of escaping. At this moment, Yang Chendong's 2,000 black cavalry were walking in a valley 30 li away. The cavalry outpost he sent was less than 10 li away from Hardened Barter. Even if that was the case, it would be extremely difficult to discover the other party in the pitch-black night. However, as the ruler of a country, Hardened Barter was not used to eating dry food, and insisted on making a fire to eat hot food. As a result, the bonfire was dazzling and bright in the dark night. It was because of the fire that the outpost of the Black Cavalry discovered them. They quickly sent someone to report to the main force behind. "There's a bonfire in a carriage?" Yang Chendong's eyes lit up when he heard the news from the outpost of the Black Cavalry. Although it wasn't very accurate, it still made him excited. If it was just an ordinary cavalry, there shouldn't be a carriage accompanying them. Since it appeared, it was very likely that it was their target. Considering that Hardened Barter had sent a total of 3 feints, and they had all fallen into his hands, the last remaining cavalry was very likely the final target. "Young master, This new discovery is very likely our target. Beta Persei's reaction wasn't slow. He thought for a while and smiled. Yes, the possibility is very high. But whether it is or not, since we have encountered them, they can't escape. Pass down the order. 500 people in a group, and surround them from all sides. Yang Chendong also smiled and gave the order. At that moment, first Captain Xiuvi was in a group, second Captain Dao Xiao was in a group, Beta Persei was in a group, and Yang Chendong was in a group with Deputy Captain Ba Dao Jiang in a group. The 2,000 black cavalry split into 4 groups and headed straight for the lakeside, forming an encirclement that wrapped around Hardenbarter's end. The 2,000 well-trained black cavalry were not very fast. Since their target had stopped moving, they had too much time to surround him. Because they weren't fast, they didn't make the slightest sound when they moved. After a few hours, a red light appeared on the horizon. When the sky was about to brighten, they had completely surrounded Hardenbarter. When the sky was about to brighten, General Tushi walked out of the barracks in a suit of armor. Then there were continuous shouts. The 5,000 black cavalry got up one after another and began to prepare breakfast before leaving. But at this moment, a sentry on the periphery ran over in a panic and knelt in front of Tushi. General, something bad has happened, something bad has happened. Why are you so panicked? Tushi's heart skipped a beat. For some reason, his heart began to beat faster, but in order to stabilize the morale of the army, he didn't show the slightest abnormality on his face. Although this calmness was concealed very well, it was soon completely destroyed by the sentry's next sentence. General, we have been surrounded. There are cavalry outside, all cavalry. What? What did you say? Where did the cavalry come from? At this time, Tushi couldn't care less about the image of a general. He stretched out his arm and grabbed the sentry's neck. There was a trace of trembling in his voice. General, this subordinate doesn't dare to lie to you. There are cavalry outside, and they are cavalry covered in black armor. They only reveal their eyes. They look very frightening, very frightening. The sentry's face was already pale with fright. He stammered, but in the end, he recounted the situation he knew. Covered in black armor, could it be the black cavalry? General Tushi, who was more knowledgeable than ordinary soldiers, trembled when he heard this. Then, there was an unconcealable fear in his eyes. If what the sentry said was true, then it would be difficult for them to escape this time even if they had wings. It was the black cavalry, the legendary strongest existence of the 5-star army. Their armor was impenetrable, and their blades were invincible. Every target targeted by them would be like being targeted by a pack of wolves. In the end, they would be torn apart without leaving behind any residue. When he thought of these terrifying consequences, although the weather was still very cold at dawn, Tushi's body was already covered in layers of hot sweat. Moreover, the sweat involuntarily dripped down from his forehead. Chapter 1306. What happened in the camp also alarmed Hardenbarter, who was still resting in the carriage. He sent a guard to ask what happened. Tushi came to the carriage with a pale face and reported through the curtain. Your Majesty, something bad has happened. We have been discovered and surrounded. It seems to be Bugnam of Gojoseon's black cavalry. What? Surrounded? Black cavalry? Hardenbarter's voice was trembling when he said these words. Obviously, he was also frightened by this news. At this time he began to regret. If he knew this would happen, he would have thought of a way to escape last night no matter how tired he was. But now it was too late to say anything. Thinking that once they were caught by the 5-star army, they would suffer a fate worse than death. Hardenbarter grabbed the Tushi general's arm as if he was grasping at a life-saving straw. Can we break out of the encirclement? Tushi wanted to say that it was impossible. This time, they were facing the black cavalry, the most powerful existence in the 5-star army. But after seeing Hardenbarter's hopeful eyes, he endured and didn't say the worst result. Instead, he swallowed his saliva and said, no matter what, this minister will do his best. Good. Hardenbarter didn't know that Tushi was being perfunctory. He said with some excitement, then I will leave everything to General Tushi. Don't worry, as long as this king can break out of the encirclement, I will take good care of your family. This was to let Tushi stay behind to cover the retreat. This also showed Hardenbarter's selfish side. In his eyes, his own safety was always the most important. As for others, they could be sacrificed at any time. If the king wanted the minister to die, the minister had no choice but to die. Tushi had no other choice but to nod heavily. Your Majesty, please rest assured. This minister will do his best to delay them. The next step was simple. Tushi led 3,000 cavalry to fight against 2,000 black cavalry. Under the protection of the remaining 2,000 cavalry, Hardenbarter led a group of royal family members to break out of the encirclement, trying to kill their way out. As long as Hardenbarter didn't die, the Turpan kingdom wouldn't be considered dead. There was still hope. The Black Knight Dragon Guards that were slowly approaching from the periphery did not immediately launch an attack. It was as if they were playing a game of eagle-catching chicks, constantly shrinking the encirclement. The black cavalry was fully clad in black armor. Even their warhorses were covered in black armor. Only their eyes were exposed. They gave off a very eerie and terrifying feeling. The sky was already bright, and when their line of sight wasn't obstructed, the appearance of the invincible black army was a great deterrent to the Turkopan cavalry. Before the battle even began, many of the Turkmen cavalry were already worried. Would they be a match for the black cavalry? The Tushi general also felt a chill in his heart, and did not have the slightest bit of confidence. However, this was his duty. Even if he knew that he would die, he still had to give it a try. Everyone get ready to charge. The enemy only has 1,000 cavalry. They don't have as many people as we do. Kill. The Tushi general felt that the morale of the army had been affected. He didn't dare to wait any longer. Otherwise, who knew how many people would dare to charge? He only hoped that with the advantage of numbers, he could delay the 5-star army. In this way, he could find an opportunity for the king to break out of the encirclement. Raise your guns. Just as the 3,000 Turkmen cavalry received the order to attack the 5-star army cavalry 2 miles away, Beta Persei, Qiu Vi Dao Xiao, and Ba Dao Jiang, the 4 captains simultaneously issued the order to counterattack. Then, in the hands of the black cavalry, each of them took out a black Type 95 submachine gun. With the continuous development, especially under the guidance of Yang Chendong, and after taking out a large number of related books, the ammunition lathe in the arsenal of Crimson City was finally completed. Although the output was not very high due to various reasons, it could already produce 10,000 bullets a day. And with the completion of another lathe, this number would continue to increase. Yang Chendong also didn't need to rely on the ammunition box in the warehouse like before. He also didn't need to worry about whether the manually made bullets were qualified or not. Without any worries, the black cavalry was the first to be issued the Type 95 submachine gun. Moreover, each soldier usually carried 5 submachine guns, which was a total of 150 bullets. In addition, their whole body was protected by iron armor. It could be said that they were invincible in both offense and defense. Only the 3,000 Turkmen cavalry were already scared out of their wits. They didn't have the slightest hint of fear. With the order to raise the guns, the muzzles immediately spat out tongues of fire towards the charging Turkmen cavalry. It was only a distance of 2 li. To the cavalry, it would only take a few seconds to cover the distance. However, these few seconds were like the difference between heaven and hell. The moment the gunshots rang out, the fate of the Turkmen cavalry was decided. Bam 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 bam. After the rapid-fire switch was turned on, they didn't even need to aim. They only needed to fire continuously, and more Turkmen cavalry fell in their charge. This was simply a battle of attrition. No, it should be said that this was a massacre. Under the clash of cold weapons and high-grade firearms, the 3,000 Turkmen cavalry were like moths to a flame. They fell to the ground, charged again, and fell to the ground again. In just a few seconds, the battlefield beside Boston Lake was covered in blood. The ground was littered with the corpses of the cavalry. Among them was the Tushi general. The general, who still wanted to risk his life, was unfortunately hit by the first batch of bullets. Then he was devoured by the endless sea of bullets. We surrender. There were still 1,000 Turkmen cavalry. When they saw so many of their comrades fall in the blink of an eye, their hearts finally collapsed. No one wanted to die, let alone die in such a meaningless charge. Immediately, those who were still alive jumped off their war horses, threw down the sabers in their hands, and knelt on the ground. It was a scene of black crows and crows. Yang Chendong, who had been watching this scene like a bystander, shook his head lightly. Everything was within his expectations. He waved his hand lightly and said to the second company leader, Dao Xiao, I'll leave this place to you guys. The rest of you, continue the pursuit. Although they said they were going to continue the pursuit, they only ran for 5 stars and surrounded the Turafan group that was still moving slowly with more than a dozen carriages. When the gunshots rang out, the sound of firecrackers rang out continuously. Hardenbarter, who was sitting in the carriage, knew that it was over. He wasn't naive enough to think that someone would set off firecrackers here to welcome him. If that wasn't the case, then there was only one possibility. The sound just now wasn't firecrackers, but the sound of gunfire. He had long heard that the 5-star army possessed the most powerful firearms. He had also seen the power of the cannons. However, he did not expect that even the firearms were so powerful. Now that he was surrounded again, Hardenbarter, who had nowhere to go, finally walked out of the largest carriage. What he saw was a group of 5-star army cavalry in black clothes and black armor. On his side, most of the 2,000 cavalrymen who were protecting them had already dismounted. They threw down their weapons and obediently squatted on the ground. Only less than 200 cavalrymen and 5 palace guards were still standing with swords in their hands. They were dutiful and loyal, but looking at their trembling bodies and arms, it could be seen that they were quite afraid at this moment. 3,000 cavalrymen, they couldn't even hold on for a minute. If they didn't die, they would surrender. How long could they hold on for? The scene in front of him made Hardenbarter, who wanted to be tough, lose his confidence. When he saw Yang Chendong in the black cavalry, who was the only one wearing a golden battle robe, Hardenbarter suddenly knelt on the ground. Great Bugnam of Gojoseon, I surrender. In the end, Hardenbarter chose to surrender. Surrounded on all sides, he had no other choice. The battlefield suddenly became very quiet. Except for the sound of the wind from Boston Lake, no other sounds could be heard. Everyone's eyes fell on Yang Chendong, who was wearing a golden battle robe, waiting for the king's decision. Yang Chendong didn't disappoint everyone. He quickly said, Surrender? You don't deserve it. Ah. These words were like a heavy hammer that smashed into Hardenbarter's heart. At this moment, his face was pale and his eyes were filled with endless fear. Why? Didn't you say that as long as I surrender, I will live? Why? Why? Yang Chendong coldly snorted and said with a cold expression, Everyone only has one chance. Your father chose to surrender, but because you gave up this chance, hundreds of my generals died because of your fake surrender. Just based on this, you will definitely die. Where is Ba Daojiang? Subordinate is here. Ba Daojiang, who had been waiting for a long time, shouted and rode out. It was Ba Daojiang who had negotiated with King Shiza. Because of this, hundreds of Mongol soldiers were killed by arrows. Although Yang Chendong didn't mean to blame him for this matter, it had always been a knot in his heart. Now that he finally had a chance to take revenge, how could he let it go? He immediately stared at Hardenbarter, who was trembling like a sieve. He thought that as the king of a country, as long as he was willing to surrender, no one would refuse. However, Yang Chendong didn't feel at ease at all. At this moment, Hardenbarter, who was shrouded in death, felt his body turn cold. His face was pale as he stammered. No, you can't kill me. I am the king of Turpan. If you kill me, you will attract the curses and fear of others. This won't be good for your future unification. I have already surrendered. You can't kill me. Chapter 1307. No benefits? This is not something you should worry about. After a cold snort, Yang Chendong said without changing his expression. Since he wanted to lead all the Han people to the peak of the world, he was destined to walk on a pile of bones. If he was afraid of rumors, then he might as well not do anything. But since he was going to do it, he had to do it to the best of his ability. He had to make all the enemies feel fear from the bottom of their hearts the moment they heard his name. Only by doing so could he achieve the best results with the least number of casualties. Ba Daojiang, what are you waiting for? Yes. With a loud shout, a fast horse suddenly rushed out of the army and rushed straight towards Harden Barter, who was standing beside the carriage with a pale face. Protect His Majesty! The 200 most loyal guards shouted and wanted to stop Ba Daojiang, but before they could do anything, another burst of gunfire sounded. The 200 cavalrymen didn't even have time to rush out before they fell off their horses one by one. It was also at this time that Ba Daojiang rushed past them. His sharp saber fell down, and a big head flew up. Harden Barter's eyes were wide open as his head was separated from his body. Even when he died, he didn't think that the 5-star army would really take his life. He was the ruler of a country. As soon as Harden Barter died, the remaining 1,000 or so cavalrymen trembled all over. They didn't know what would happen to them. Beta Persei rode to Yang Chendong's side and asked carefully, "Young master, I'll leave the rest to you," Yang Chendong said with waning interest. Harden Barter was already dead, so he naturally didn't care about the others. After saying this, under the lead of the 200 Black Knight Dragon Guards, he slowly returned to where he came from. Yes. Beta Persei respectfully sent off Yang Chendong. When his arm fell, he looked back at the Torpon soldiers kneeling on the ground. They were so scared that they didn't know what to do. He slowly said, "If you want to live, kill all the people in the carriage. Otherwise die. As for the other Black Knights and Dragon Guards, after they are done with the development, they will set up an observatory. We must let others know the consequences of going against our 5-star army." This meant that they couldn't let Harden Barter's family go. Although they were mostly women and children, they were also a scourge. If they stayed, who knows what would happen when the 3 princes grow up. If they didn't remove the roots, they would grow again when the spring breeze. Although this was a bit cruel, for the sake of the overall situation, they had to do it. Of course, the Black Knight Dragon Guards were not interested in doing such dirty work. They did not want to attack unarmed people. Fortunately, with these surrendered soldiers, they could do such a thing. They could also use them as proof of their allegiance to seize the right to live. Harden Barter was dead, so his family naturally didn't pose any threat. In order to survive, the more than 1,000 cavalrymen pounced on the carriages like a pack of wolves. Then another massacre took place. Yang Chendong, who had already gone far away, had a cold expression on his face. He didn't know if what he was doing was right or wrong. Sometimes he would be soft-hearted. But when he thought about how if it wasn't for his appearance, the Han people would first be enslaved by the Jianghu slaves hundreds of years later, and become low-class people like slaves, then they would have to face the invasion of the Western powers, especially the invasion of the Japanese, who knew how many innocent people were killed. In contrast, in order to prevent the Han people from being enslaved and bullied, he was willing to be a villain and a demon king. Forget it, if I don't go to hell, who will? If there is karma, then come at me. Yang Chendong muttered in his heart as he rode away. Next to Boston Lake, statues were soon erected. Not only were there heads of women and children, but even the head of King Harden Barter was among them. When the news spread out, it immediately caused an uproar. Countless people were furious and scolded the 5-star army for being too cruel. At the same time, they were also worried about their future. If they didn't surrender, would they have the same ending? After setting up the statues, Beta Persei said to the surviving Torpon cavalrymen, "This is what you did. It has nothing to do with our 5-star army, do you understand? Yes, we killed these people." The captives who survived with great difficulty immediately knelt on the ground and swore. They had already taken that step and had no other choice. Very good. Beta Persei nodded in satisfaction. Although it was more or less a lie, these people really weren't killed by them. This was the truth. Harden Barter was dead. With the help of Daiqin and Thorgen, the city was quickly breached by the 5-star army and public security began to stabilize. The granaries were opened, and the people could go home. For a time, the people on the streets were grateful to the 5-star army and Bugnam of Gojoseon. To the commoners, whoever allowed them to survive was their benefactor. As for the people who were loyal to the king, in the face of life and death, how many of them could be Wentianxiang? The news that Harden Barter died next to Boston Lake was quickly spread. This was naturally Yang Chendong's idea. He didn't need to hide anything, And since he did it, he wasn't afraid of others talking about it. At the same time, he also wanted to see how Daiqin and Zhengzhou would perform. When the news came, the two generals immediately closed their houses and didn't come out. It didn't take long for the two resignations to be sent to the military camp of the 5-star army and placed in front of Yang Chendong. "Young master, you don't know what's good for you." Beta Persei's eyes flashed with anger when he saw that Daiqin and Zhengzhou chose to resign from their current positions and would rather be a normal person than work for the 5-star army and Yang Xie. In Beta Persei's eyes, it was their fortune that the young master was willing to use them. Now that he publicly refused, he didn't want face. It had to be said that at this moment, in Beta Persei's eyes, Yang Chendong's wishes were the most important. This was because he went from not being able to eat or sleep well to where he was today. And all of this was brought to him by Yang Chendong. He was his benefactor in this life. In comparison, Yang Chendong wasn't angry. Instead, he looked at the two resignations with satisfaction and said, "Not bad. These two are loyal and can be used. How about this? Order all the 5-star army soldiers in the city to retreat to the outer city." Outside Daiqin's house, Yang Chendong had already changed into a green robe. Beside him was the black cavalry. They didn't wear armor, but only ordinary people's clothes. They just stood there like this, waiting for the master of the house to appear. Not long later, the house door opened. Daiqin, with bloodshot eyes, brought a group of servants out and knelt in front of Yang Chendong. It could be seen that Daiqin's expression wasn't good. He knew that the king was dead, and even his family wasn't released. In his eyes, the 5-star army's actions were too cruel. He really couldn't imagine that this was done by the Han people who were taught by Confucianism. What was the difference between this and the Mongolian great concubuli? With such a knot in his heart, Daiqin obviously couldn't risk his life. He was already prepared to hand over all his power and become an ordinary person. But he didn't expect that Bugnam of Gojoseon didn't have the intention to let him go. He actually brought people to his house. Was he going to hide his bow after the birds had flown away? With such doubts, and with the determination to die, Daiqin led a group of people in the mansion to kneel in front of Yang Chendong, putting on a look of absolute determination. "Take the people away." With regards to Daiqin's actions, Yang Chendong didn't care at all. His face didn't show any expression, and after saying this sentence, he turned around and left. Very quickly, two black cavalry walked up and carried Daiqin, letting him follow in the group. As for his family members who were kneeling on the street, no one cared about them. Daiqin didn't know what they were going to do. He used his expression to suppress the cries and screams of his family members, and just like that, he followed behind Yang Chendong into Foreshore City. Not long later, he saw Gegener also being brought over. He was also alone and was sent into the group. The two of them walked together and quickly exchanged glances. After seeing the confusion in each other's eyes, they simply let go of the doubts in their hearts and followed behind Yang Chendong. They wanted to see what kind of tricks Bugnam of Gojoseon was going to play. The outer city was already occupied by the 5-star army, but the soldiers in the inner city had already retreated. The security of the inner city also fell into chaos because of this. Although they didn't know why the 5-star army retreated, but to many people, there was no order and law in the inner city, and this gave some people an opportunity. This was especially true for those who were lazy and gluttonous. They saw an opportunity and hope. A city without order and law, a city without supervision, caused the evilest nature in people's hearts to be exposed. When Yang Chendong and his group entered the inner city, they could see smashing and looting happening everywhere. On the streets, it was common to see people fighting to death and being crippled. A person from a rich family or a merchant became the main target of looting. Some young girls also became the existence of delicious cakes, attracting countless people's attention and looting. After just walking through one street, they saw over a dozen commoners lying on the ground in pools of blood. They saw 2 shops being smashed and burned. They saw 3 women being openly carried on the shoulders of evil men, as they left while laughing loudly. If it wasn't for the fact that Yang Chendong and his group had too many people, and that they were all valiant, their embroidered clothes would have become the target of looting. Chapter 1308. How did this happen? In the group, Daiqin and Zhenjia's expressions changed greatly. They couldn't believe this scene. When they saw more and more Turpan civilians dying on the streets, their hearts ached and they couldn't believe it. Yang Chendong, who had been waiting for the reaction of the two, finally spoke at this time. Look, this is the true evil in the hearts of humans. This king knows that Hardenbarter's death, including his entire family, was in the hands of the surrendered soldiers. You are angry, even angry. But this king wants to say that they are humans. Are these ordinary citizens not humans? If the two of you are only angry because of the destruction of the Turpan royal family, then this king can let the people kill each other and reveal their ugliest side. This way, it won't be long before this Kali city becomes an empty city. Is this what you, who claim to be good officials for the people, want to see? This question made Daiqin and Zhenjia speechless. They finally understood what Yang Chendong meant. If they didn't submit, then he would let this matter continue to develop. At that time, all the civilians of Turpan would be destroyed because of the internal strife. As Turpan people, as people who had lived here for generations, both Daiqin and Zhenjia didn't want to see such a thing happen. That way, they wouldn't be able to face their ancestors and ancestors after death. But if they submitted to Yang Chendong and worked for him because of this, they were somewhat unwilling. For a long time the two didn't speak. Yang Chendong also didn't have the intention to rush them. There were some things that had to be thought through by others. If he blindly interfered, even if he could be used, it might not be sincere. Since they needed time to think it through, he would give them time. After an unknown period of time, Daiqin saw another family being robbed by bandits on the street. An old man was stabbed and fell on the street because he chased after the bandits. Daiqin finally couldn't bear it anymore. Wunan King, we have already surrendered. They are already your people. How can you watch them die and not save them? Daiqin was angry. This was what Yang Chendong wanted to see. He laughed and said, "Surrendered? Why do I see them returning to their own residences and not caring about the outside world?" He was saying that Daiqin and Zhenjia's actions made him angry. At that moment, Daiqin could only speak in a short breath. But we also did our best for the 5-star army to enter Kylasi. No one will deny your contributions and efforts. But what this prince wants is for you to truly submit to me. Yang Chendong's voice suddenly became stern. These civilians weren't true Han people. If someone started it, they would pick up their weapons and become enemies with the 5-star army. Even so, if one more died, he wouldn't feel the slightest bit of heartache. Only those who truly submitted to Yang Xie were his people. Only then would they receive his care and care. Only then would he have the obligation to protect their rights. Yang Chendong wasn't in a hurry, but Daiqin and Zhenjia couldn't do that. If they just stayed in their residences and didn't care about the outside world, maybe they could pretend to be deaf and blind. But since they saw it with their own eyes, they couldn't just ignore it. Bugnam of Gojoseon, we submit. We take back our resignation. We are willing to work for Yang Xie and the 5-star army. Finally, the cruelty of reality forced the two to change their minds. They had to do their best to protect the civilians of Turfan. Yang Chendong was waiting for these words. He stopped in his tracks and turned around to look at Daiqin and Zhenjia. Very good, you made the right choice. Now I will give you the authority to send soldiers into the city. When the time comes, I will leave behind 10,000 5-star army to help you restore law and order. After that, there will be other non-human civilians coming in. The Turfan civilians here will also leave their homeland and live in other places. But I can guarantee that as long as they sincerely submit, not only will their safety be guaranteed, their future lives will be better than now. Even the descendants of the two generals will thank you for your actions today. Yang Chendong had never been stingy with his help to the civilians who truly submitted to him. When they went to a new place, they would be given enough land to live on and start a new life. At that time there would be no more war, no more fear. There would only be hope and longing for a limitless life. This point was already felt by the countless people who submitted to Yang Xie. After finally convincing Daiqin and Gejener, Yang Chendong handed over the task of reorganizing the Turpan kingdom to the two of them. Based on the principle of using the barbarians to control the barbarians, No one understood the situation here better than them. Naturally, no one could do a better job than them. Although Turfan was destroyed, Yang Qindong's footsteps would not stop. He brought the 5-star army and continued to move deeper into Ili. His target was the entire world. Just like Yang Xie had the Security Bureau and the Central Intelligence Bureau, Baiming also had the Imperial Secret Service and the East Faction Guards. While Yang Qindong was leading the 5-star army to slaughter in all directions in Ili, shaking the prestige of our Han people, information regarding that place was also being sent back to the hands of Marquis Wuqing Shiheng. Every time he saw the news of the 5-star army winning another battle, Shiheng's face would turn ugly. If not for the fact that he understood Yang Qindong, he would have doubted the authenticity of the news. The Great Ming Dynasty emphasized culture and suppressed martial arts. The status of martial artists was never high. Actually, it was not only the Great Ming Dynasty that was like this. Ever since An Lushan started a rebellion, the Song Dynasty was like this, and now the Ming Dynasty was like this as well. Even though the Zhao clan and the Zhu clan started a rebellion through martial arts, this did not stop them from getting rid of the donkey after it had outlived its usefulness. That's right, they got rid of the donkey after it had outlived its usefulness. In order to prevent the same thing from happening to them, the Great Ming Dynasty had many similarities with the Song Dynasty. For example, in order to prevent the martial artists from gaining power, the emperor would work together with the civil officials to suppress them. This resulted in the saying that the emperor and the scholar officials ruled the world together. As a result, the strength of the country would slowly decline, and in the end, it would be replaced by other dynasties. All of this was just to say one thing. Under such a policy, it was difficult for the martial artists to achieve anything. Shiheng lived in this era, and had seen too many cases of civil officials suppressing the martial artists. Even though he was Wuqinghao, it was still difficult for him to enter the eyes of many people. In their eyes, he was just a martial artist. There were many things that happened from time to time. For example, the provision of provisions was always a little late. It seemed that if they did not do so, it would be difficult to show the importance of the civil officials. At the Wanquan division, the ration officer once again came to Shiheng to complain about the lack of rations. When he sent people to rush them, they were deliberately making things difficult for them. There were even rumors that they had eaten so much, yet they still hadn't won a single battle, and that they were truly a bunch of trash. Enough. Shiheng sat in the main hall of the residence with an unhappy expression. Marquis will personally report this matter. The provisions will be sent soon. His eyes weren't very big, but they were somewhat sinister as he fiercely glared at the fodder manager. Then he waved his hand, indicating for him to leave. The warning in that glance was very obvious. It was probably to tell the provision officer that some words could not be said casually. If he dared to disturb the morale of his troops, he would be punished by military law. After receiving the warning, the fodder officer immediately retreated while trembling. Just as he left, an order was sent out to invite General Fang Dingshan to the residence for a discussion. Not long after, General Fang Dingshan, who was dressed in armor and somewhat travel-worn, arrived at the Wuqinghao residence. In the study, he saw Shiheng waiting for him. "Marquis, you called for me?" When Fang Dingshan saw Shiheng, he greeted him. Then he found a place to sit and drank the cup of warm tea in front of him. One was a close official of the emperor, while the other was a marquis personally conferred by the emperor. The two of them worked together in the frontier fortress. As time passed, their relationship became much closer. Just from Fang Dingshan's behavior after entering the study, it could be seen. Shiheng looked at Fang Dingshan with a face full of smiles. He also looked at his casual actions. This person had some ability, especially in the area of training soldiers. Under his leadership, the Liaodong Iron Cavalry's battle strength was constantly increasing. The number of soldiers also increased. It had increased from the previous 70,000 to the current 100,000. Naturally, this was tacitly approved by the emperor. At the same time, it was also fully supported by Shiheng. After seeing the 5-star army's cavalry continue to dominate the world, the importance of cavalry became more and more obvious. Not only did the Liaodong Iron Cavalry increase in numbers, Their battle strength was also not bad. Shi Hung went to check on them before. Whether it was their military strength, military discipline, or battle strength, they all shocked him. He had seen with his own eyes a group of 200 Liaodong iron cavalry charge into a group of 3,000 infantrymen. When the wooden swords clashed, the wind swept away the clouds and defeated the enemy. With such a strong army, even if they were to face the famous cavalry of the 5-star army, they wouldn't be afraid. With this confidence, Shi Hung had called the other party over in the hopes of winning a battle. This way, he wouldn't be underestimated by the civil officials in charge of the provisions behind him. After watching Fang Dingshan drink 2 full bowls of tea, Shi Hung finally opened his mouth. He first repeated what the provisions officer said, then sat down to see Fang Dingshan's reaction. Oh, someone actually said that. They really can open their mouths. The emperor didn't even order us to fight against the 5-star army. They are jumping up and down like monkeys. Fang Dingshan was after all a martial artist, so when he spoke he did not have too many taboos. Chapter 1309. That's right. Shi Hung said empathetically. Those people in Jingdo are already afraid of the powerful Yang Qindong. Especially after the previous defeat, some people are as timid as mice. They keep telling His Majesty not to provoke Bugnam of Gojoseon. They even say that until now, Bugnam of Gojoseon hasn't done anything harmful to the Great Ming. It's really funny when you think about it. They don't make a move because they have too many targets to conquer. They don't have the time to do anything. That's right. Those scholars who only know how to use literature and martial arts are simply harming the country, Fang Dingshan said in agreement. He also didn't agree with these people's words. What Bugnam of Gojoseon still had the Great Ming in his heart, and didn't dare to make a move against the Great Ming. In his eyes, it was nonsense. Yang Qindong didn't make a move now because he didn't think the time was right. Once he did make a move, it would be like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. No one would be able to stop him, right? Scholars are harming the country. Shi Hung also let out a long sigh. After seeing Fang Dingshan's anger, he suddenly changed the topic and said, "It's because of this that we can't let this kind of thing happen. We can't just stand by and watch the 5-star army grow. I don't dare to say anything about other places, but at the very least, we can't allow this kind of thing to happen in our territory." Oh, Marquis is preparing to make a move? Fang Dingshan also understood the meaning behind these words, and asked with some excitement. Yes, he's going to make a move. We can't just stand by and watch the 5-star army's provisions walk past Tulu City every day and do nothing, Shi Hung said with a righteous expression. Fang Dingshan first nodded in agreement, but then quickly shook his head. But His Majesty didn't give an order. This order was referring to the order to openly attack the 5-star army. Speaking of which, ever since they failed to attack the beginning city, Baiming had become much more well-behaved. At the very least, they no longer openly became enemies with the 5-star army. In the words of those civil officials, since Bugnam of Gojoseon was so belligerent, then let him fight others. As long as he did not find trouble with Baiming, they would let him do as he pleased. Swords had no eyes on the battlefield. Once they lost a battle and Yang Qindong died on the battlefield, the so-called 5-star army would also collapse. At that time, Baiming would send out troops to suppress them, and they would be able to win the battle. In the end, this was the mentality of an ostrich. Since he couldn't beat them, he placed his hopes on others. Since the 5-star army did not take the initiative to provoke the Baiming army, they did not need to make a move. Everyone could live peacefully for a few days. Naturally, Su Yozhen's contribution was not lacking in this. Yang Qindong needed to conquer the grasslands and the inner regions to increase the 5-star army's influence and territory. If Baiming made a ruckus at this time, it would be very inconvenient. This was why Su Yozhen ordered the Baiming army to not make a move. Now, it seemed that the effect was not bad. At least some civil officials believed it. Baiming's emperor, Zhu Qiyu, also did the same. However, Shi Hung, who had been laughed at for asking for provisions, felt a bit of anger in his heart. He decided to make a move and fight with the 5-star army to find trouble with them. It's fine. It's true that the emperor didn't give any orders, so we don't need to use our own names. We can just pretend to be bandits and remnants of the grasslands. Marquis has already thought about it. We can split up into smaller groups and use small groups to disturb the enemy's supply lines. This way, we won't have to worry about being reprimanded. We can also train our soldiers and steal some provisions for our own use. It's killing 3 birds with 1 stone. The more Shiheng spoke, the more excited he became. It was as if countless benefits were already waiting for him. At this moment, Fang Dingshan's eyes became brighter and brighter. Disguising themselves as bandits and forces opposing the 5-star army, to disturb them was indeed a good move. This way, they wouldn't have to worry about the emperor's reprimand. If they fought more battles, they would be able to accumulate small victories. It was truly wonderful. He was so excited that he immediately stood up and said, "That's great. I'll go arrange it right away." "Good. General Fang, you've worked hard. However, you must remember not to send too many people at once. After all, there aren't many forces opposing the 5-star army in this area," Shiheng carefully warned. He said this because he had another purpose. That was to send out a small number of cavalry at once. Even if one of the groups failed or were completely wiped out, it wouldn't affect the overall situation of the Liaodong cavalry. Fang Dingshan listened and nodded repeatedly. Then the two discussed for a long time and discussed some specific issues. In the end, when both sides felt that there were no problems, they looked at each other and laughed. Under the protection of more than 100 5-star army soldiers, a group of more than 10 horse carriages escorted the provisions from the first city to the Shajing city. Along with this group, there were also 200 people of different races. There were men and women, old and young. They either brought their families or supported the carriages as they walked. Upon closer inspection, everyone's eyes were filled with yearning for a better future. These 200 people had already obtained identification cards issued by the Logistics Command. With this, they could each receive 10 mu of rations and farming tools according to the number of people they had when they arrived at the new place. They could also be allocated a house and a sum of money that was enough for them to settle down in their new home. The future place would also be their new starting point. As long as they were willing to work hard, with provisions and money, how could their life not be good? Although they had to leave their hometown because of this, compared to living a stable and prosperous life, those were nothing. The 200 people were even chatting and laughing along the way. Although everyone came from different ethnic groups and regions, it was very likely that they would be living together in the future. Thus, they slowly became familiar with each other along the way. For the behavior of the people, the 100 5-star army soldiers didn't do anything to stop them. The higher-ups had already said that as long as the people were obedient, they would be convenient along the way. After all, the army would still need to rely on these people to provide the provisions needed by the army in the future. It was a bit inappropriate to say that they were the parents of food and clothing, but it was not too much to say that they depended on each other. In this way, the people helped to drive the carriages. When the road was smooth, they would sit in the carriages to rest for a while. From time to time, when they encountered water sources, the soldiers and civilians would stop to fetch water and interact with each other. It was a picture of harmony. However, all of this beauty was suddenly cut short by a series of rumbling sounds that came from the ground. As the captain of the team, Bien Bin, the company commander, pulled out his sword when he heard the rumbling sound. Then he shouted, "Soldiers, prepare for war. People hide beside the carriages." It was no wonder that Bien Bin was so nervous. The area he was walking in was far from the first city and Shajing city, so there would often be bandits in this area. Although relying on the powerful reputation of the 5-star army, ordinary people didn't dare to find trouble with them casually. However, there were still some desperados among them, and there were still some people who were willing to take the risk. With the idea that a villain would not make a big mistake, Bien Bin gathered the soldiers together. Among them, there were 50 soldiers who had war horses. At this time, they were sharpening their swords with the company commander, ready to deal with any unexpected situation. On the other hand, the people didn't seem to be nervous. They were all people who had been conquered by the 5-star army. They had seen the power of the 5-star army, and didn't think that anyone would dare to challenge the authority of the 5-star army. Therefore, even if they heard the rumbling sound of the warhorses, there were still some people who looked forward, wanting to see who was so bold, and then watch these people who appeared leave with their tails between their legs. The 5-star flag was fluttering in the breeze, like a command flag standing on the mule carriage. It also proved the identity of this supply team to the outside world. Many times, the appearance of the 5-star flag was like a huge and unstoppable city wall, causing some bandits to forget and retreat. After all, the strength of the 5-star army was too strong. It was so strong that many small tribes who had not yet surrendered did not have any intention to resist. This was also the biggest reliance and confidence in the eyes of the people. Report: a group of 200 Mongolian bandits appeared in front of us. They are rushing towards us quickly. They are less than 5 miles away. The scout cavalry in charge of guarding the front rushed back and shouted loudly as he rushed back. Mongolian bandits? When he heard this name, Bien Bin's face became a little ugly. The so-called Mongolian bandits referred to those small Mongolian groups who were not willing to surrender. They were usually small in number, and their battle strength was not strong. When faced with the 5-star army, they would avoid them. However, when faced with the 5-star army, they would suddenly attack like a mad dog. These bandits could not be killed, and they could not be killed. They were the most troublesome thing to deal with. Who would have thought that he would encounter them here today? Bien Bin felt a headache coming on, and he hurriedly started to get into formation. 50 cavalry soldiers were ready to fight at any time, and 50 infantry soldiers were ready to shoot from afar. Bien Bin wanted to use this method to warn those bandits that he was not someone to be trifled with. He hoped that this method could scare them away, and make them stay away from him, and avoid a possible disaster. Bien Bin was a little nervous, but he did not show it on his face. Instead, he confidently said to his soldiers and the people around the carriage, "Everyone, don't worry. Even if the bandits come, they will not easily make a move. For these carriages of provisions, the price they have to pay is not proportional to the price they will get." Everyone thought that the bandits who came were after the provisions. However, they did not know that this time, it was not the bandits who came, but the valiant Liaodong Iron Cavalry. Baiming had spent a lot of money to build this cavalry. Chapter 13:10. It was only the distance of a 5-star army. For a real cavalry, it would only take half the time it takes to drink a cup of tea to arrive. When both sides could clearly see each other's formation, Bien Bin, as the company commander, took the initiative to move forward and shouted, "We are the new 5-star army's new army, 1012th Division, 101st Division, 7th Regiment, 2nd Battalion, 5th Company. We were ordered to escort the supplies to the army in front. It's better for you to move aside. Otherwise, if you attract the wrath of the 5-star army, it's not something you can." After revealing his identity, before he could finish his warning, an arrow pierced through the air and hit Bien Bin's chest, where his heart was located. With just one arrow, Bien Bin's shouting stopped abruptly. His body trembled a little, and with an unwilling expression he fell from his horse. Bien Bin was dead. The sudden death of a company commander shocked everyone. The 200 civilians let out a cry of alarm, and started to flee in all directions. Obviously, this scene had exceeded their psychological defenses. They did not expect the bandits to be so arrogant, to actually kill someone without saying a word. Furthermore, the person they killed was a captain of the 5-star army. This was equivalent to drawing a grudge that would not end until one of them was dead. Presumably, once this matter was spread, the headquarters of the 5-star army would definitely not let this matter rest. However, that was all for later. The most important thing now was to survive. Otherwise, they would definitely not be able to witness this scene. The civilians began to run in all directions in panic. However, the soldiers could not run away. They still needed to avenge their company commander. After hesitating for a moment, both the cavalry and the infantry launched their own counterattack. Thus, a small-scale battle began. Unfortunately, the cavalry needed some distance to launch an attack, while the infantry's range was not enough. In just the first clash, the 5-star army suffered a great loss. More than 30 soldiers died on the spot. The 200 cavalry of the bandits did not feel satisfied after the first charge. What they wanted was to kill all of them, and not leave a single one alive. Therefore, they quickly mobilized the horses to charge again. After repeating this process 4 times, there was not a single 5-star army soldier who could breathe beside the carriage. All of their brothers in the company had been killed. Under the surprise attack, only 2 of the Meng bandits' 200 cavalrymen were killed, and only a dozen were injured. Seeing this result, the leading Liaodong cavalry general was very satisfied. He laughed and said, "1 team, stay behind to escort the carriages. 2, chase after the fleeing civilians. Remember, don't leave a single one alive. Don't leave a single one alive." The cavalry of the second group, which had close to 100 men, responded in unison before charging off in all directions. Not long after, cries for help could be heard from afar, but they soon disappeared from the grassland. 100 soldiers and 200 civilians were all dead. Not a single person was left alive. And this was just the beginning. In just 4 days, more than 10 companies and more than 2,000 civilians had been killed, and more than 200 carriages of provisions had been stolen. The news was quickly discovered by the scouts of the 5-star army, and they reported back one by one. In the headquarters of the new army, Tiger's man's eyes were burning with anger. Looking at the bad news that came one after another, his face was as gloomy as water. In front of him, the 3 company commanders were also unhappy. They clenched their fists and looked like they wanted to eat someone. Forcefully suppressing the anger in his heart, Tiger's man looked at the 3 commanders and asked, "Tell me what you think." The commander of the 101st Army, Wuxia, who had the most experience, was the first to speak. "This is clearly a military operation against our 5-star army. Someone is playing with fire. We can't just sit here and wait for death. We must find the culprit and kill one as a warning to the others. Let's establish Jingguan Temple to scare everyone." His voice was filled with murderous intent. Wuxia was really angry. More than half of the soldiers that were killed were from the 101st Army. As a commander, how could he not be angry when he saw his soldiers die without knowing who the culprit was? "That's right. We must investigate. After we find the culprit, we must exterminate his entire family as a warning to the others." The commander of the 102nd Army, Hichong, also spoke. His aura was not any weaker than Wuxia's. On the other hand, the commander of the 103rd Army, Qinfeng, didn't speak immediately. Instead, he lowered his head and thought about something. His silence made Tiger's man look at him. "Commander Qin, what do you think?" Qinfeng only woke up when his name was called. He raised his head and said his opinion. "Commander Tiger, from what I see, this isn't the work of normal bandits. I've asked the scouts who went to investigate the scene. They said that most of our soldiers were killed in one hit. I really can't think of anyone who could do this." As expected of someone who worked in the Ministry of Public Security in Crimson City, he could see the essence of the matter at a glance. Tiger's man nodded in satisfaction. "That's right. What Commander Qin said is right. If it were normal bandits, it would be impossible to kill all of them. Even if our 5-star army can't defeat them, at least 10 to 20% of our soldiers should be able to escape. However, none of them escaped. This is enough to prove that our opponent is a powerful and well-organized organization. Normal bandits can't be compared to them." The moment Tiger's man finished speaking, the commander of the 101st Army, Wuxia, blurted out, "Does this mean that the Walla army has returned?" The news of Yeshen leading 70,000 Walla army and escaping from the inner district had already been spread back. Yang Chendong had even sent a telegram to remind everyone to be careful of the enemy's sudden attack. After all, he couldn't be sure if Yeshen was really afraid of him or not. Wuxia's analysis was reasonable. "It can't be them." Commander Qinfeng directly denied it. "Why?" Wuxia asked in confusion. "It's very simple. This isn't the style of the Walla cavalry. If they appeared here, 70,000 of them would have already caused a commotion. Only then would they be able to attract more Walla cavalry to join them. Why would they do something so cowardly? Just for a small amount of food, the sacrifice is not proportional to the gain." Qinfeng said in a very confident tone. Less than 200 carriages of food was really not much use to a 70,000 Walla cavalry. He even had a feeling that the real target of the attacker wasn't the food. It was just something they did along the way. Qin Feng's words made Lu Zhuo fall into deep thought. He didn't say anything else. On the other hand, the commander of the 102nd Army, He Chong, suddenly thought of something and said, "If it's not the Wara cavalry, could it be the Baiming army?" It wasn't strange for He Chong to say this. In his opinion, the only powerful army in the area was the Baiming army. But did they have the guts to do so? Qin Feng didn't say anything. Although he thought so, he didn't have any evidence. But when it came to military matters like this, if it wasn't handled well, it could lead to big problems. Think about it. If it wasn't the Baiming army who did it, and they really did fight the Baiming army, what would the result be? The person who actually did it would probably wake up laughing in his sleep. Investigate. In the end, it was Tiger's man who made the decision. Send more cavalry scouts. If one team isn't enough, then send two. If two teams aren't enough, then send 5 or 10 teams. In short, we have to find them and surround them. We need solid evidence. After the meeting ended, all the cavalry scouts in the new army were sent out. Not only that, Yang Si from the logistics headquarters had also called over the cavalry scout division that was currently in training. This was a cavalry scout division that he was currently training, and the first commander of the scout division was the chief scout instructor Su Yunsheng, whom he had spent a great deal of effort to invite from Crimson City. Su Yunsheng was the first recon company commander and recon battalion commander of the 5-star army. He was also a person who was registered with Yang Chendong. Later on, because of his outstanding strength, he was sent to Resin City to teach the Cold Front soldiers. Over the years, he had taught so many students that even he couldn't remember how many there were. However, he liked the feeling of fighting and killing. This time, Yang Si had spent a lot of effort to invite Yang Si, who had stayed in Resin City, to the logistics headquarters. According to his promise, as long as Su Yunsheng performed well, he would definitely have the opportunity to kill enemies on the battlefield. This time, more than 10 companies of soldiers were killed, 2,000 to 3,000 civilians were slaughtered, and 100 to 200 logistics carriages were stolen. This attracted the anger of the new regiment, and also angered Yang Si. After all, the logistics and rations were under his control. Since someone dared to do this, it meant that they didn't put him in their eyes. Therefore, this time, he invited Su Yunsheng to come out. There was no need to investigate this matter clearly and obtain evidence. Since there was a battle to fight, Su Yunsheng did not decline at all. He quickly gathered the only 2,000 scouts in his hands. Although it was a division-level unit, scouts were not easy to find. Not all soldiers who could kill enemies could be good scouts. In accordance with the principle of better to have nothing than to have something substandard, only these 2,000 people were selected from the hundreds of soldiers in the logistics headquarters. However, these 2,000 people were indeed outstanding people. It was not an exaggeration to say that after a little training, they were not inferior to the soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division. In fact, they were even better in some aspects. In the end, Su Yunsheng trained these 2,000 people as scout instructors. He was counting on these people to be successful in the future and train, and bring out more outstanding scouts. Now that he had an order, Su Yunsheng gathered all these 2,000 people, and gathered them on the field of the scouts outside the first city. Su Yunsheng, who had the rank of colonel, was riding on a horse majestically. His eyes inspected the 2,000 soldiers who were standing in a mighty posture. "Warriors, we have a mission now. This is also a test of what you've learned recently. People always say that you're a mule or a horse. Now is the time for you to perform. Now I order you to form a team of 10. Choose a captain and vice-captain. Then the captain will come to me to receive the mission. Now you're dismissed." Chapter 13:11. With 2,000 soldiers in a team of 10, there were a total of 200 teams. With such a large net, Su Yunsheng had installed 200 large cameras and 2,000 small cameras between First City and Shajing City. When the time came, even the slightest movement here would not be able to escape his eyes. He wanted to see who was so bold as to launch a sneak attack on the soldiers of the 5-star army. According to the content taught before, when the 2,000 scouts left First City, It was like a spring breeze and a drizzle. Half of the scouts did not even ride a warhorse. They disguised themselves as ordinary people and mixed into the crowd exiting the city. Then they disappeared into the vast grassland and did not attract anyone's attention. Even the commander of the new army, Tiger Man, only knew that Yongxi had also sent out scouts. As for how many scouts had been sent out, he had no idea at all. Even the current highest-ranking general in First City did not know the situation, let alone the intelligence personnel of the Baiming army in First City. They only knew that the new army had sent out all the scouts. They also knew that these scouts were wearing military uniforms and were looking for something in groups. Later, this news was passed to Marquis Wu Qingho, Shiheng, by means of a messenger pigeon. Soon, the news was passed to General Fang Dingshan, who was waiting for an opportunity to continue to attack the logistics and transport troops of the Five-Star Army. Fang Dingshan had long expected that the new army would respond. He had also specially formulated a plan for this. He quickly ordered the Liaodong cavalry, who were looking for opportunities everywhere, to stop all military operations and avoid the limelight first. As a result, thousands of scouts of the new army returned without any results. For half a month, they did not find any trace of the enemy, and no more transport troops were attacked. They thought that the enemy hiding in the dark had retreated and reported this to the headquarters of the new army. Tiger Man looked at the report that he was not very satisfied with and said with a dark face, "Let's keep an eye on them for a while." Although he also knew that it was very difficult for the cavalry scouts to move continuously, he did not believe that the enemy would take the initiative to retreat after tasting the sweetness without suffering any losses. As a result, the thousands of cavalry scouts continued to run on the grassland. Sometimes, when they passed by some trees and valleys, their every move was clearly seen by the Liaodong cavalry hidden in the forest. However, because the latter were already prepared, they missed several times. The sudden attack seemed to have faded away with the passage of time. Gradually, more and more cavalry scouts began to withdraw from the battlefield and return to the various armies and divisions. After all, those who could become cavalry scouts were the backbone of the army. It was impossible for them to gather together to complete a mission that they didn't know would happen. The earth seemed to have returned to tranquility. When the last batch of cavalry scouts also returned to the first city to rest and reorganize, the northern Ming Liaodong iron cavalry hidden in the dark began to appear in the sky again like a kite being flown. No, it was the grassland. After a month of ceasefire, the centurion in charge of this attack was named Dong Ping. He was young, bold, and could even be called arrogant. After hiding in the mountains for a month, he suffered a lot. The mosquitoes in the mountains were not to be trifled with. They did not care if you were a general or a soldier. In short, they would bite you when they had the chance. Perhaps it was because of his blood type. Dong Ping was very popular with mosquitoes. When he walked out of the mountains, his exposed skin was covered in red, which greatly affected his glorious image. Dong Ping, who was angry in his heart, naturally couldn't care less about the mosquitoes. He vented all his resentment on the Five-Star Army. After a month in the mountains, they had basically eaten all the food that could be eaten. Now they urgently needed to replenish their food. The Five-Star Army's transport fleet was their best target. Spread the men out and find the closest convoy to us. Surround it and destroy it. Dong Ping looked at the 4 cavalry scouts in his hand and gave an order. Then he led the entire team of 200 cavalrymen and slowly followed behind the scouts. When Dong Ping left the mountain, he was also very cautious. First, he sent out the only 4 cavalry scouts to wear the military uniform of the Five-Star Army. They went out to scout. After confirming that there was no danger in the surroundings, he led the team out. However, he didn't know that not long after he left the mountains, he was discovered by the scouts from the logistics headquarters. Different from the scouts of the new army, these scouts were not discovered by the scouts of the Baiming at all. In addition, some of the soldiers did not ride horses. Instead, they pretended to be wandering civilians and dug holes in the ground. They completely hid themselves in the ground, and only occasionally poked their heads out to observe the enemy. Therefore, their disguise was not discovered at all. Previously, as the division commander, Su Yunxing had made a judgment. If the enemy was so hard to find, then they must be hiding somewhere. It was difficult to hide the enemy's army on the flat grassland. Only the trees and valleys could be possible. Thus, he placed some of the scouts near these places where people could easily hide and waited for the enemy to appear. As soon as Dong Ping led his team out, the appearance of his 4 cavalry scouts attracted the attention of the scouts hidden nearby. They were hiding in the holes they dug. When they heard the sound of horse hooves, they quietly poked their heads out. When they saw that it was actually their own comrades, they didn't pay too much attention at first. However, some inexplicable actions of these cavalrymen still aroused their suspicions. When these scouts disguised as 5-star army cavalrymen left a mark on the ground every time they walked, this made the scouts feel that something was wrong. If it was the 5-star army's cavalrymen, they didn't need to do this because this area was now under their control. They didn't need to be so careful. Someone who could do this was very likely to be an enemy. When they thought of the possibility of an enemy appearing, the scouts nearby became excited. There were even some soldiers who wanted to directly take down the cavalryman that appeared in their line of sight and interrogate him. This action was stopped by the leader, Li Yun. Li Yun was originally a company commander of the new 2nd Army's 1st Cavalry Division. Because he was very unyielding during the investigation, he was chosen by Yang Si and transferred to the Logistics Command. Yang Si, who thought highly of this person, wanted him to learn more skills, so he sent him to Su Yunqing's cavalry division. He was still a company commander there. This time he was also sent out and became the leader of a 10-man squad. Li Yun's personality was unyielding, but when he did things, he wasn't reckless at all. He was even praised by his division commander, Su Yunqing, who said that he had a calm personality and was more suitable to become an outstanding scout. When he heard his team members say that they should take down the suspicious person, he thought about it and shook his head. This should just be the enemy's outpost. If we take him down, it's very likely that we'll alert the enemy. It's better to wait and see. He continued to mark out the marching route. The main force should follow behind. As the leader, Li Yun rejected the idea. The scouts who were extremely strict naturally didn't refute him. They stared closely at the route and waited for the enemy's main force to appear. Hard work paid off. More than 2 hours later, Dong Ping brought 200 Liaodong cavalrymen. They had indeed followed the signs. This was because in their eyes, this route was the safest and least likely to be discovered by the 5-star army. Leader, there are 200 cavalrymen. A scout said with excitement in his eyes. Fortunately, he didn't forget his own situation and lowered his voice. I saw them. How about this? When the enemy cavalrymen pass by, we will follow behind them. You go and find other comrades with war horses nearby and spread the news. This time, we will eat them and capture them. I want to see which faction they belong to. Li Yun's eyes were also filled with excitement. He knew that this time, they had encountered a big fish. Their team would definitely make a great contribution. The well-disguised scouting team did not even notice the enemy's scouts, let alone Dong Ping, who was burning with anxiety, and was in a hurry to find the convoy to replenish their supplies. They walked past where Li Yun was hiding, and at their closest, they were less than 5 meters away from each other. When Dong Ping's cavalrymen completely passed by, a soldier appeared like an agile monkey and dashed into the distance, turning into a distant black dot. Captain Li Yun followed behind, and led the other members of the squad to carefully tail the target. Dong Ping was completely oblivious to all of this. Around him, more and more scouts received the news and began to surround the place where they were. Especially when Commander Su Yunqing found out that the target was only 200 cavalrymen, he made a bold decision. This time, there was no need for anyone else to act. The scout team alone was enough to complete the mission of capturing the enemy. On the grassland, there was a convoy escorting supplies forward. It was already afternoon, and the sun shone on the people's bodies, making them feel comfortable without the slightest bit of heat. If a cold wind blew past, the feeling would be even more comfortable. In this kind of weather, whether it was the 100 soldiers in the troop or the 200 civilians accompanying them, all of them had a happy smile on their faces. Sometimes they would even perform a military and civilian cooperation, singing a few unique battle songs that belonged to the five-star army as they walked. It was a scene of unity and joy. The good times didn't last long. This scene was quickly disrupted by the sound of the cavalryman's footsteps. When the company commander heard the sound of the cavalryman's footsteps, he instinctively shouted, "The convoy has stopped. Everyone, prepare for battle." Chapter 13:12. He had long heard that his brother's unit had been completely annihilated by an unknown force. When this company commander had set off, he had been warned repeatedly that if he encountered any danger, he had to protect himself at the first possible moment. Once he confirmed that the enemy was behind him, he had to immediately send out a distress signal. Thus he immediately set up a defensive formation. The 100 soldiers all held their weapons and stared nervously in the direction of the horse hooves. Not only the soldiers but even among the 200 civilians, there were a few young and strong men who took the bows and spears handed over by the soldiers of the five-star army. They were prepared to fight to the death to protect themselves. Only the elderly, children, and women among the civilians had nervous expressions. They didn't know what was waiting for them. While waiting, every minute and second felt like an eternity. Just when everyone felt that their palms were covered in sweat, the enemy cavalry finally appeared. It was a group of 200 cavalry that didn't look like the Baiming army's uniform at all. They were like a train speeding along the train tracks. As soon as they appeared, they quickly approached the small transport team. They didn't have any intention of greeting them. The moment they appeared, they were filled with killing intent. "It's the enemy." The company commander quickly made a judgment. Then he reached into his bosom, and a cylinder appeared in his hand. He quickly pulled it open. Tong! A burst of colorful flames soared into the sky after an explosion. This was the signal for help in a critical situation. When the signal was sent out, the company commander's eyes were filled with killing intent. He was already prepared to fight to the death. He was very clear that with the strength of his company, it was impossible for all of them to be a match for the enemy cavalry. However, he couldn't escape. The only thing he could do was to pin down the enemy and wait for reinforcements to arrive. Dongping appeared. The distance of 3 kilometers could be said to be covered in the blink of an eye. At this moment, his eyes revealed a look of disdain and complacency. The five-star army's fighting strength had always been powerful. However, that was only for the elite troops. This new army that was responsible for transporting food hadn't been established for long. Moreover, half of them were cavalry and half of them were foot soldiers. Many of them hadn't even been on the battlefield and hadn't even seen blood before. They only relied on their youthful strength and empty strength. How could such an army be a match for their elite Liaodong iron cavalry? Dongping had already started to consider how he was going to eat his fill after plundering the rations of these carriages. He didn't place the 105-star army and 200 commoners in his eyes at all. So what if they were prepared? In the face of his cavalry, wouldn't they have to stretch out their necks and wait to be slaughtered? So what if they sent out a distress signal? In at most a quarter of an hour, Dongping was confident that he would be able to kill everyone in front of him, snatch the food, and run away. At that time, in the vast grassland, who could do anything to him? Once he entered the forest, he wouldn't be afraid even if there were thousands or tens of thousands of five-star soldiers. His body exuded confidence, and his eyes carried a relaxed smile. In Dongping's eyes, this battle was as simple and easy as a hunt. He only needed to open his bloody mouth, and victory would be his. The 200 cavalrymen on the other side came closer and closer. When they could clearly see the viciousness of the other side, the company commander gave the order to shoot. At the same time, he brought the remaining 50 cavalrymen and charged forward. If the cavalrymen wanted to display their advantage, they had to charge forward. The man borrowed the horse's momentum and the blade's speed to display the strongest power. If they just stood there and chopped, it would be like not using bean buns as rations and not using the village chief as a leader. Xiao 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 xiao. The arrows came from afar, but Baiming's Liaodong iron cavalry were already prepared. They only needed to dodge and block to easily avoid the arrows. Other than 1 or 2 unlucky ones who were injured by the arrows, no one died. This was because Baiming's Liaodong iron cavalry were well trained. and because the 5-star army had too few archers. There were only 50 of them, so they weren't of much use. Kill! With a loud shout, the company commander swung his saber to the side. Although the situation wasn't good and death was inevitable, he still had to give it his all before he died. Even if he could only kill one person, it would be worth it. Ding ding dang dang. What followed was the sound of weapons clashing. It was like the bell signaling the end of a class. The cavalrymen fell from their horses one after another, just like students jumping out of class. 50 against 200, ordinary soldiers against elite veterans. In just one exchange, more than half of the 5-star army soldiers died. Less than 20 of the original 50 cavalrymen were left. The company commander's left arm already had a bloody wound. Under his strength, the blood flowed even faster and soon dyed half of his clothes red. He didn't care about this at all. He had already injured an enemy, so what he wanted to do now was to increase his victory and kill 1 or 2 people. It could be considered finding a companion in the afterlife. Kill! After another loud shout, the company commander brandished his saber and charged forward. Beside him were less than 20 cavalrymen who were lucky enough to survive. Kill! Dongping was also shocked by the company commander's imposing manner. After the previous round of charging, one of his men was actually killed and 7 others were injured. This result greatly angered him. He was leading the elite cavalrymen that Baiming had spent a lot of money to train. The other party was just a young recruit who had undergone a short period of training. Even if there were 100 of them, they shouldn't be exchanged for the life of one of his brothers. Now that one of them had died, he was furious. He felt that his dignity was being challenged. Next, he wanted to carry out the fiercest revenge. He wanted to let these damned 5-star army soldiers know that provoking him wouldn't have a good ending. Under 2 loud shouts, the 2 sides clashed again. What followed was another wave of sword light. More than 10 cavalrymen fell to the ground and were buried here. Ha ha. A loud laugh came from the company commander's mouth. This time he finally managed to kill an enemy with his own hands, but the price he paid was a bone-deep wound under his ribs. However, he didn't care anymore. What he wanted was to kill enough people. That way, even if he died, he could look up to the sky and laugh. Dongping's expression became even worse. In the second round of charging, although he killed 13 of his opponents, his side had 2 dead and 3 injured. Looking at the cavalryman formation that only had 6 people, he gritted his teeth and said word by word. Kill them all. Don't leave a single one alive. Kill. The other Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen were also full of hatred. The ordinary 5-star army soldiers that they regarded as ants actually dared to fight back. They actually killed 3 of their men and injured several others. This was a disgrace. They had to kill all of their enemies to prove that they were a strong army. Both sides were full of anger. Killing intent filled every part of their body. Everyone knew that they would fight until the end. In the end, only one team would be standing here. And that team must be the Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen. Xiao xiao xiao. The sound of air breaking suddenly came from afar. Not far from where the 2 sides were fighting, a team of 10 cavalrymen appeared. They were the scouts that immediately rushed over after receiving the news. This team of 10 had been hiding in the dense forest all this time. According to the military order, they did not have any direct scouting mission. Their most important task was to slow down the enemy's escape once they appeared. After waiting for a month and being bitten countless times by mosquitoes, they finally had the chance to attack. 10 elite veterans that were selected from various armies rushed out. They finally arrived at the battlefield at the last moment. 10 arrows were shot out. They pierced through the air and attacked the Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen from the side. Unfortunately, because the distance was too far, the arrows fell to the ground halfway and did not cause any damage to the enemy. Ha ha! Dongping and his subordinates could not help but laugh when they saw this scene. They were surprised by the 5-star army's quick reaction. However, only 10 cavalrymen came. Moreover, they had such poor archery skills. This made them relax. These people were not worthy of being called their opponents. You guys go and take care of them. After laughing, Dongping did not care about these 10 cavalrymen at all. He casually pointed at a squad leader and asked him to lead the team. The squad leader had 9 soldiers under him. He immediately agreed, and the 10 of them, including himself, went to meet the 10 cavalrymen. They smiled and waited for their prey to enter the net. Then they would show their cruelest side and kill them. Dongping was not in a hurry to make a move. He wanted to let these 5-star army soldiers who dared to draw their swords at him see how he would kill them one by one. The feeling of despair must be very fun and interesting. They're here. Facing the 10 Baiming Liaodong cavalrymen who were wearing Mongolian uniforms, the squad leader of the 10 cavalrymen, Zhang Zhou, said softly. When he said this, there was not the slightest trace of nervousness on his face. On the contrary, he looked eager to give it a try. Zhang Zhou used to be a deputy battalion commander in the new Second Army. Although the disciplinary investigation group did not find anything wrong with him, he could not stay in the new Second Army anymore. Therefore, he came to the logistics division and waited to take up a position in another army. In the end, because of his good performance, he caught Su Yunxing's eye and became a soldier in the reconnaissance division. Zhang Zhou, who had been on the battlefield and had seen blood, did not completely change after a period of learning as a reconnaissance division. His personal ability had indeed more than doubled. He had always wanted to show off what he had learned. Now that the opportunity had come, the long-awaited battlefield made his hormones rise. He could not wait to perform well. Chapter 13:13. Zhang Zhou was not the only one who was excited. The 9 squad members beside him were also very excited. Warriors who could become scouts were all veterans who had been through hundreds of battles. They had potential that others did not have. In addition to what they had learned during this period of time, they were eager to perform well and see how much they had improved. The 10 soldiers with different expectations slowly approached. They did not show the slightest bit of fear when facing the 10 enemy cavalrymen. Even though there were close to 200 cavalrymen behind these cavalrymen staring at them like tigers and wolves, they were still fearless. You have some guts, but I don't know if you can maintain your composure under my cavalry sword. Charge! The squad leader yelled and led 9 cavalrymen to charge forward. Although there were only 10 cavalrymen, they still gave off a sense of majesty. Spread out. Facing the cavalrymen who were charging more than 200 meters away, Zhou Hao gave the order the moment the enemy moved. Then the 10 soldiers separated and each occupied a position within a limited time. It felt like they were fighting alone, but also like some kind of formation. Shoot the arrows. As soon as they finished moving, Zhou Hao shouted. His voice was like the roar of a tiger and the roar of a dragon, spreading far and wide. Dongping and the others who were not far away heard it and laughed out loud. The effectiveness of a cavalryman's bow depended on the distance. If the distance was too close, then the bow and arrow would be almost useless. It was all because the enemy was already in front of you while you were raising the bow. How could you block it? This was also the reason why Dongping and the others laughed. However, their laughter came to an abrupt stop. They all stood there as if they were frozen. In their line of sight, every single one of the 10 cavalrymen had a trembling arrow resting on their chest. After struggling for a while, the 10 of them fell to the ground one by one like ducks being chased into the water. They actually hit the target. In a short period of time, 10 arrows hit the target. This result was really shocking. Dongping and the others were dumbfounded. How could they have known that archery was a necessary skill for a qualified scout? Division Commander Su Yunxing had put in a lot of effort in this regard. After he received the full support of Commander Yang Si, he spent a lot of material and financial resources to finally double the archery skills of the 2,000 scouts under his command. They might not be able to hit every shot, but at such a close distance, hitting the enemy's chest would not be a problem. Just now, the 10 of them had spread out in preparation for the archery. What was different from the past was that these 10 people did not choose the person closest to them when shooting. This was because in many cases, the closer the distance, the higher the accuracy. Humans are alive, but they can move and dodge. It was because of these factors that Su Yunxing's strategy was to shoot at random. Don't think that I will shoot at you just because you are close to me. If you think this way and dodge according to my arrow, then you're making a big mistake and falling into my trap. Because I'm shooting at the person beside you. and the person beside me is shooting at you. In this way, it was really impossible to guard against. A cavalryman could instinctively dodge one person's arrow, but they couldn't dodge multiple people at once. This was why they fell into the trap. This was because their dodging actions were useless. They even got the wrong target, so how could they dodge successfully? Under one shot, the 10 Baiming cavalrymen who were not familiar with this strategy all fell to the ground. Perhaps some of them would not die immediately, but they would still be breathing more than they were exhaling. They did not have much time left to live. Yeah. Accompanied by Dong Ping and the others' surprise and confusion, Zhou 10 people cheered loudly. Speaking of which, they had only tried this strategy on the scarecrow. This was the first time they had actually killed an enemy on the battlefield. They never thought that they would get the jackpot. How could they not be happy? At this moment, only the cheers of Zhou and the others could be heard on the battlefield. Everyone else was stunned in place. They were all shocked by the scene in front of them. The company commander, who only had 5 soldiers with him, seemed to have forgotten his situation. He also forgot the despair in his eyes when he saw that there were only 10 reinforcements. The hope of survival rose in his heart once again. This is courting death. I will kill all of you. I will capture all of you and torture you to death bit by bit. Above. Dongping finally reacted. When he saw the 10 cavalrymen on the ground, his whole body emitted a cold aura. In the past, when they were carrying out missions, the mission would be considered a failure if one of them died. But now 13 of them had died. Even if he killed the 5-star army and the civilians in front of him, he would still be punished when he returned. If he did not do well, he might even be punished and demoted. When he thought of General Fang Dingshan's cruel military law, Dongping felt his whole body turn cold. He needed to vent his anger. His target was the 10 5-star army soldiers who suddenly appeared. Under the command of above, 50 cavalrymen walked out in a row. Obviously, after experiencing the failure just now, these Baiming army soldiers did not want to fight one-on-one anymore. They wanted to fight with numbers. The 50 cavalrymen slowly came forward and gradually formed their encirclement. It was as if they were saying, "We want to surround you, capture you alive, and slowly torture you to death." This is a competition of numbers. Zhang Zhou looked at the 50 cavalrymen who were gradually approaching and shook his head. Then he looked back. When he turned back, his eyes were incomparably calm. "Sai, if we really want to compete in numbers, you guys are not a match." As if to prove Zhang Zhou's words, after he finished speaking, more and more black dots appeared behind him. The rumbling sound of horse hooves resounded on the ground again. After the battle just now, more and more cavalrymen from the reconnaissance division had gathered here. 1 squad, 2 squads, 5 squads, 10 squads. In just a short period of time, more and more black dots appeared in all directions. With a rough glance, the number of people was probably more than 500. This sudden change fell into Dongping's eyes. In a short period of time, his eyes were constantly changing. He was actually surrounded. This was impossible. Before the battle, his 4 scouts had already scouted the surroundings and did not find any traces of the 5-star army. What was going on? There were too many questions in his heart. Even though Dongping wanted to get to the bottom of this, there was no time for him to think about it. They absolutely could not be surrounded. Otherwise, once their identities were exposed, who knew what kind of impact it would bring to northern Ming? The reason why they pretended to be Mongolian cavalrymen was because they did not have the courage to face the 5-star army head-on. "Quick, let's rush out. Let's rush out before they surround us," Dongping shouted loudly. Then, he whipped his horse and charged out in the direction where he thought the encirclement was the weakest. Kill. Seeing that Dongping was about to escape, the first person to react was the company commander, who only had 5 soldiers with him. His own reinforcements had arrived. His morale was greatly boosted. He wanted to avenge his fallen comrades. The company commander and his 5 soldiers moved. But what was strange was that only they moved. The scouts that surrounded them did not attack, nor did they run. Instead, they stayed where they were. Some took out bows and arrows, some took out horse ropes, and all of them leisurely looked at the Baiming army, who were running in all directions. How to attack the enemy when they were still was one of the training courses for scouts. To them, this was a small matter. as simple as eating and drinking. Dongping did not know this. When he saw that the 5-star army soldiers did not stop him, he thought that they were afraid and ran even faster. He urged his horse to gallop, as if he was afraid that the enemy would suddenly turn around and attack him. Attack! Someone in the crowd shouted first. Then bows and arrows, horse ropes, and other objects flew out. Some of the bolder ones directly jumped on the Biming soldiers closest to them. It was obvious that they wanted to capture them alive. More and more scouts arrived in the encirclement, but none of them charged forward. They also did not have the intention to swarm forward. Those who came late stood at the periphery. Like this, the encirclement became wider and wider. It gave people a feeling that they could not see the end of the encirclement. Dongping's luck was not bad. He dodged the bows and arrows, and even dodged 2 horse ropes. He was running further and further away. However, the soldiers beside him were not so lucky. When the 5-star army soldiers suddenly appeared, and when their numbers increased, their morale dropped to the freezing point. They no longer had the will to fight, and the only thing left was to run away. However, this wish was hard to fulfill. In the process of running away, they were pulled off their horses one after another. Cries of pain could be heard from time to time. "Quick, leave this place. This is a trap." Dongping constantly encouraged himself. Although he did not know how the 5-star army discovered him and formed such an encirclement, he knew one thing. However, there was one thing that he was clear about. If he stayed here, he would likely suffer a fate worse than death. Good luck could not envelop a person forever. Just as Dongping was charging outwards on his warhorse under the protection of the remaining 2 bodyguards, his body suddenly turned sluggish. Under the powerful force, his entire body fell off his warhorse. The moment he fell, he did not know when the horse he was riding on had been caught by the horse rope. This was also the reason why he fell from his horse. With a plop, Dongping fell from his galloping warhorse. At this moment, Dongping felt as if all the bones in his body had been broken. Pain filled his entire body, making him feel as if being able to take a deep breath had become an extravagant hope. Even so, Dongping did not forget his situation. If he continued to walk, the pain would be unbearable. However, if he did not leave now, he was afraid that he would suffer 100 or 1,000 times more pain. That was what he could not accept. Chapter 13-14. He forced himself to sit up straight, then held his breath and jogged forward. He wanted to escape from this place. He didn't want to die. Swoosh! Dongping, who was running, once again fell to his knees. The first thing he fell to his knees was a lasso rope around his feet. Dongping, who had fallen, felt as if his chest had been smashed by a heavy hammer, making it increasingly difficult for him to breathe. However, the hope of survival still made him force himself to sit up. He reached out his hand and touched his ankle. He wanted to untie the lasso rope and regain his freedom. Do you still want to struggle? The person who caught Dongping was Captain Li Yun, who had just arrived. He rode on a warhorse and looked at the struggling Dongping with great interest. Then, with a smile on his face, he let out a frivolous shout. He dismounted his warhorse and immediately galloped forward with all his might. Dongping, who was in the middle of untying the rope, only felt a strong force coming at him. Then his whole body was pulled away. He followed behind his warhorse and lay flat on the grass, allowing the newly grown weeds to continuously rub against his back. Dongping had only been dragged out for 50 meters, but he had already left a long trail of blood on the ground. Dongping was already riddled with scars after being tossed around again and again. Blood had dyed his clothes red, especially the part of his back that was in close contact with the grass. His buttocks had long been scraped open, and a layer of skin had already peeled off. Since Dongping was captured, none of the 200 Biming cavalrymen escaped. In the end, they were all gathered together. Among them, there were 103 corpses and 97 captives. Division Commander Su Yinxing appeared. With the rank of senior colonel, he appeared very mighty and spirited. Not bad. Looking at the results of the battle, Su Yinxing was very gratified. This was the first time they had taken down all the enemies. More importantly, none of the scouts died. Only 7 of them suffered some light injuries during the battle. They would be good men again after recuperating. Find out who they are. Find out where the other accomplices are hiding. Then report the results to Logistics Commander Yang. Su Yinsheng was no longer interested in looking at the captives. In his eyes, these people no longer posed any threat. There were only 2 outcomes waiting for them. Those who cooperated would live, and those who resisted would die. 97 wounded captives were gathered together. Under the watchful eyes of the cavalry scouts, they knelt in a row, as if they were prisoners waiting to be judged. After Zhang Zhou received the task of interrogation, he strode over to the first Northern Ming cavalryman kneeling on the ground with a ghost-headed saber in his hand, and asked in a booming voice, "Speak, who are you?" Facing Zhang Zhou's question, the cavalryman straightened his neck and raised his head in disdain. "If you want to kill me, just kill me. Why are you spouting so much nonsense? At most, I'll be a good man again after 18 years. All right." Zhang Zhou was not angry at such an answer. Instead, he was happy. "I like tough guys, but I hope you can continue to be tough." As soon as he finished speaking, he raised his saber. When it fell again, a bloody arm flew into the air. With a single slash, he chopped off one of his arms. Blood splattered everywhere, and the intense pain caused the Baiming cavalryman to cry out in pain before he fainted. "You fainted just like that? Boring." Seeing that the Baiming cavalryman in front of him was so weak, Zhang Zhou shook his head in disappointment. He raised his saber again, and a fresh head was separated from the body. "Sai, he's already fainted. There's no need to interrogate him. Why don't we just kill him?" Zhang Zhou muttered to himself as he walked up to the second person. His face was calm as usual. It was as if he didn't kill a person but a chicken. Seeing Zhang Zhou walk up to him with his saber still dripping with blood, the second Baiming cavalryman's expression changed again and again. With the previous example, his heart was in a mess. Speak. That would be betrayal. If he didn't speak, he would die. It was very likely that he wouldn't die quickly. What choice should he make? Zhang Zhou didn't give the cavalryman much time to think. To Zhang Zhou, there were a total of 97 captives. Even if half of them died, it didn't matter. In the end, as long as one of them spoke, it would be fine. He believed that among these 97 captives, there would always be someone who was afraid of death. "It's your turn." "Same question. What do you want to say?" Zhang Zhou's voice was very normal. It was as simple and casual as a commoner asking if they had eaten. I. Just as the cavalryman was hesitating, the ghost head saber fell again, and another arm flew into the air. Before it landed, Zhang Zhou's hellish voice sounded. "You're actually a stutterer. How boring." "No, I'm not a stutterer." The cavalryman who lost an arm shouted loudly, but it was the last sound he made in his life. The ghost head saber fell again, and another head was separated from the body. After killing 2 people, Zhang Zhou didn't have any intention of stopping. Compared to these people who attacked the 5-star army and killed innocent civilians, what he did wasn't excessive at all. He took a step forward and arrived in front of the third person. With the example of the first 2 captives, this person was so scared that he lost control of his bladder. When he saw that the person who came was a devil who killed without batting an eyelid, he was completely terrified. Without asking, he took the initiative to say, "We are the Baiming Liaodong Heavy Cavalry." Pooh! The ghost head saber fell again, and an arm flew into the air. Hiss! This scene frightened the other 94 captives. What? Did he still have to die after answering the question? Just as everyone looked at Zhang Zhou, wondering what was going on, an awkward expression appeared on Zhang Zhou's face. Sorry, my hand slipped. I'm used to it." You won't die anymore." Zhang Zhou said apologetically to the cavalryman of Baiming who lost an arm, and was rolling on the ground in pain. Pain, unbearable pain, intense pain. Even so, the cavalryman of Baiming didn't dare to faint, because he didn't know whether he would lose his value or die if he fainted. "Well, you're not bad. Men, take him away and bandage him properly. I hope he doesn't die." Zhang Zhou ordered his team members. Then he went to the 4th person. "The question has changed. How many people did you bring this time? Where are they?" With Zhang Zhou, the god of death, the captive soldiers were very cooperative. They all told Zhang Zhou everything they knew. Even the injured Dongping was very cooperative. He even revealed his identity and said that he was the leader of the cavalrymen of Baiming. He even said that he was willing to lead the 5-star army to take care of the Baiming Liaodong heavy cavalry hidden in the mountains to atone for his crimes. According to Su Yunqing's instructions, the results were quickly sent to the logistics headquarters via telegram. Yang Si took the results to the headquarters of the new army. The 102nd and 103rd divisions moved out and went straight to the few forests that Dong Ping and the others had told them about. Surround this place. Prepare the kerosene and burn it. After tens of thousands of cavalrymen surrounded the forest, the commander of the 103rd Division, Qin Feng, ordered his men to start a fire attack. In the forest, 5,000 Liaodong heavy cavalry were hiding. The leader was the deputy general of the Baiming heavy cavalry, Luo Baiquan. Considering that there were too many people for a sneak attack, Luo Baiquan only brought 10,000 cavalrymen this time in order to hide himself better. Originally, everything was going smoothly. They could even eat the food they stole and be self-sufficient. Just when Luo Baiquan wanted to use the battle to support the 5-star army, the situation suddenly changed. The scouts reported that tens of thousands of 5-star army soldiers appeared outside the forest they were hiding in. He had a bad feeling in his heart, but in order to calm the soldiers down, Luo Baiquan said indifferently, "It's fine. Even if they know we are here, they can't do anything to us in the forest." Luo Baiquan was very confident. However, unexpectedly, the 5-star army didn't have any intention of charging into the forest. Instead, they used the most primitive and most direct method of attack: fire attack. On the grasslands there were many forests, valleys, and hills. Especially the forests, because the environment was well protected, there wasn't a problem of random logging. Dense forests could be seen everywhere. This was the main reason for the instability. However, even if they knew this was the case, they couldn't do anything. They couldn't burn the entire forest, right? If they did, what would they do when they needed firewood to build houses? However, if they had enough information, it wouldn't be a problem to burn only one place. Just like now, the fire was only aimed at the hiding place of the Baiming cavalry. When the smoke rose, all sorts of birds and animals in the forest ran out. Not long after, the Baiming cavalry also charged out. Luo Baiquan couldn't allow his brothers to be suffocated or burned to death. Although he knew that there was a large group of 5-star army archers waiting for him outside, he had no other choice. Other than charging out, there was no other way. When they rushed out, Luo Baiquan had also played a trick. He had divided the 5,000 people into 20 groups. The larger groups had 1,000 people, while the smaller groups only had a few hundred people. The purpose of this was to confuse the 5-star army outside. When the 5-star army was at their wits' end, more people would have a chance to escape. This included himself. In order not to attract attention, Luo Baiquan only left 50 bodyguards behind after he finished distributing the other groups. With such a small group charging out, they naturally wouldn't be a big target and wouldn't attract the attention of the 5-star army. As expected, when Luo Baiquan's team followed behind the other teams, they didn't attract the attention of the 103rd Division. They thought that it was just a small group of enemies. After a series of arrows and arrows, Luo Baiquan finally managed to escape, leaving behind 20 or so bodyguards' corpses. Chapter 13-15. After interrogating the captives, he found out that the big fish was released. Commander Qin Feng blamed himself very much. This battle showed him that Baiming's elite Liaodong cavalry was completely different from his previous opponents. In the past, he dealt with some bandits and some anti-Yangxie forces without a strict organization. Compared with Baiming's highly disciplined Liaodong cavalry, he was too far behind. Qin Feng put away his carelessness and took the initiative to apologize to Commander Tiger's man. Afterwards, he was given a warning, which made him more alert and finally became a famous general. Luo Baiquan was lucky and finally escaped, but the others were not so lucky. After the battle, only less than 1,000 cavalry returned to Tulu City through various means. When they went out, there were 10,000, but when they came back, there were only 1,000. In comparison, the loss was far more than the 5-star army, and they were elites. In order to cultivate this elite cavalry, Baiming spent a lot of manpower, material and financial resources. Every loss would make Fang Dingshan's heart ache. This time, they lost so much that he really wanted to cry. After Wu Qinghe heard the news, he first comforted Fang Dingshan, saying that these lost soldiers could be re-recruited and retrained, and that there was no need to be too sad. After that, he suggested that the Liaodong cavalry should be prepared for battle. After all, he did not know whether this would anger Bugnam of Gojoseon, and whether it would lead to a war between the 5-star army and the Baiming army. Commander Tiger's man did not dare to make the decision whether to attack Tulu City or not. He sent a telegram to Yang Qindong and reported the matter in detail. After Yang Qindong, who was in Ili County, learned of the situation, he gave the order for everything to proceed as usual. This time, although the Baiming army provoked them first, they suffered the biggest loss. He believed that with this lesson, they would not act recklessly again. As for not falling out with Baiming, Yang Qindong naturally had his own plans. Yang Qindong could attack other foreign races, forces, or countries without hesitation, and he would not hesitate to move forward with the blood and corpses of his enemies. But for the great Ming dynasty, which was full of Han people, he would never do that. His goal was the strength of the Han people, and to reach the peak with them. If he killed a Han person, wouldn't that be the opposite of his goal? The matter was temporarily put aside. After this matter came out, Shiheng and Fang Dingshan became a lot more honest. Although they did not know why the 5-star army did not retaliate, they did not dare to try. If they really attracted the 5-star army, they did not have much confidence that they could stop them. But now they were already satisfied that both sides were not interfering with each other. Outside Gonglu City, battle cries shook the heavens, and countless people wielding swords and blades were attacking the city walls. The soldiers wearing the Li Bianli uniform were constantly shooting arrows or holding swords and spears to defend the city. Not far away from the city, the 5-star army's cavalrymen were lined up in neat rows. The flag of the 5-star army was fluttering high in the air. The commander of the first army of the non-human kind, Bai Shuang, was riding on a warhorse, silently watching everything that was happening in front of him. Ever since they had crossed the heavenly mountains and entered the Little Yule city, the first army led by Bai Shuang had appeared invincible. The quick-witted White Shuang adopted the method of sending out a small team when encountering a small group of enemies, and sending out the entire army when encountering a large group of enemies. This allowed the soldiers under him to gain experience on the battlefield. Although there were some losses because of this, the effect was very good. The soldiers had all experienced the cruelty of the battlefield, and had all seen blood. There were no new recruits in the army, and they were all veterans. While training the soldiers, Bai Shuang did not forget to strengthen himself. This time, only his first army came to Ili Bianli, and in the end, there were only 30,000 of them. With just these people, they wanted to overturn Ili Bianli, who had hundreds of thousands of soldiers and was the host. He did not have such arrogance. How to strengthen himself? After thinking about it, Bai Shuang had his own idea, and reported this idea to Yang Qindong through the radio, and obtained his approval. After obtaining permission, Bai Shuang started to put it into action. And under his hard work, the villages outside the important towns and cities were surrounded one by one. Some of the rich people in the villages became ghosts under the blades of the first army. After killing those who obstructed them, they opened the granaries, and the local people were finally able to fill their stomachs. At this moment, when the 5-star army expressed their intention to recruit them, and said that as long as they followed them, once they took down the important towns, they would be able to obtain more food. More and more young people joined the 5-star army, and the army swelled up. Since ancient times, the people were the kindest, and the easiest to be satisfied. This was not only the case for the Han people, but for the other races as well. Their request was very simple, and that was to be able to eat their fill and not starve to death. However, this small request could not be satisfied. The gap between the rich and the poor existed everywhere, but the emperors only saw the prosperity of the capital and the big cities. As for the lives of the people in the corners, they did not know, and no one would tell them. However, it was undeniable that these people were a force that could not be ignored, and they were often the first to rebel. Under Yang Hodong's guidance, Bai Shuang, who understood this principle, chose to pull these people under his command. He borrowed their strength to complete the strategy of using the spear to attack the shield. From the looks of it, everything was going smoothly. Currently, Bai Shuang had 30,000 soldiers of the First Army under him, and 80,000 people under him. However, these 80,000 people were not the limit. Every day, thousands of people were joining at a rate of increasing. The more people there were, the more rations they would need. Thus, Bai Shuang gave up on the idea of attacking the small villages and set his sights on the important cities. Gonglu City was the main road from the capital to Telahara, and it was heavily guarded. Of course, there was also a large amount of rations stored there. 110,000 people, under Bai Shuang's orders, surrounded Gonglu City, and what followed was a brutal siege. This battle would focus on the civilians. When Bai Shuang promised that once they took down the city, they would take 70% of the wealth and rations, while the 5-star army would only take 30%, the civilians became excited and agitated. Even without Bai Shuang's supervision, they had already made their own siege ladders. Holding the various weapons they had obtained before, including sabers, swords, spears, staffs, and even hoes and pickaxes, they launched an extremely fierce attack on Gonglu City. Within Gonglu City, there were 20,000 soldiers of the First Army. With such an advantage in numbers, if the First Army of the non-humankind only had 30,000 soldiers, it would be almost impossible to take them down with cold weapons. However, with these 80,000 soldiers, it was a completely different story. They were fighting for survival, and they were truly fearless. After one wave died, another wave charged up, and it seemed like they would not stop until they took down the city. After 5 days of continuous siege, only half of the 20,000 soldiers in the city remained alive. Moreover, the morale of the soldiers was very low. Seeing that the city was about to fall, the general had no choice but to send out the 6th carrier pigeon to ask for help. At this time, within the palace of the First Army, King Bao Lide was sitting on his throne with a worried expression. His gaze fell on Prime Minister Arap, General Waliji, Korban, and the others in the hall, as if he was asking for advice. The sudden appearance of the First Army had completely caught the First Army off guard. When King Bao Lide and Prime Minister Arap had analyzed the situation, they had not thought of this at all. They believed that while the 5-star army was powerful, their lack of manpower was a fatal flaw. It was impossible for them to pose any threat to the First Army. With Heavenly Mountain, even if the 5-star army came, they would not be able to send too many people. After all, once there were too many people, food would become a huge hindrance. They had come with the intention of watching from the sidelines, and they had even thought about how many reinforcements they should send to help the Turpan Kingdom. After all, they knew that if the lips were gone, the teeth would be cold. Who would have thought that the 5-star army would appear right in front of them, and no one could stop them? They had arrived at Gonglu City just like that. Gonglu City was only a little over 200 li away from Ili City. Once that place was breached, Ili City would be in grave danger. It could be said that their foundation had been shaken. Under King Bao Lide's gaze, Arap finally spoke. We have to save them, but the problem is how to save them, and how many soldiers to send out. This meant that Arap was also hesitant. How many people should they send to save them? Should they send their main force to fight the 5-star army? Or should they send out a small number of soldiers to save Gonglu City from being surrounded? The reason why Arap was so troubled was because the people attacking the city were the citizens of the First Army. Even if they killed them, it would not do any harm to the 5-star army. On the contrary, they would have to bear the bad reputation of killing the citizens. This was not what the Prime Minister wanted. On this point, Bao Lide was also in a difficult position, and he was also very angry. He believed that he had been very compassionate towards the people ever since he took the throne, and his cooperation with the Prime Minister Ali Pu was also considered tacit. The strength of the entire Ili Empire was constantly rising, otherwise, he wouldn't have the idea of expanding his territory. But why would the citizens rebel? This was simply incomprehensible. On this point, King Bao Lide had also committed a bureaucratic crime. And even Prime Minister Arab had become an accomplice to the villain. They could only see the prosperity in front of them, but they could not imagine the hardships of the people in the remote areas under their rule. Of course, with their status, it was difficult for them to investigate the hardships of the people. With a large number of people following them, how could they have the opportunity to do so? On this point, it had to be said that Yang Chendong had done very well. Chapter 13-16. With Yang Bao as a powerful tool, countless reporters went around and reported everything they saw and heard to the local Yang Bao. The situation could be seen at a glance. Once the reporters found out that there was a bug in their reports, they would receive a large reward. This greatly motivated the reporters. For example, the Yang Bao of the various regions had become something that important officials like City Lord Yu Qian had to read every day. Even Yang Chendong would read the different Yang Bao when he was free, to understand the situation under his rule. In an era without the internet, it was naturally impossible to spread the news all over the world. However, with Yang Bao, the situation was greatly alleviated. In particular, Yang Chendong strongly encouraged the reporters to report more shady things and gave them a large reward. This kind of thing that was usually seen as shameful by the monarch, and even covered up, was actually encouraged by Yang Chendong. It was easy to imagine that in front of these reporters, they would pick on some things for no reason. Which official would dare to mess around with their superiors? Yang Bao's appearance also became a spur to the officials of the various regions. Once they understood where the problem was, they would solve it as quickly as possible. They were afraid that this matter would be reported and affect their own political achievements. In addition, Yang Xie's law was based on a proportional distribution of grain. If the harvest was good, more grain would be handed in. If the harvest was bad, less grain would be handed in. And if the harvest was bad, children could still receive grain. In this way, they did not have to worry about not having enough to eat in a year of famine, or having to hand in a large amount of grain when the harvest was good, and the people became richer. At the very least, food and clothing were no longer a problem. The commoners would be able to eat their fill, and they would have extra money to buy the things they liked. Under such living conditions, who would think of rebelling? If someone dared to think of rebelling, they would not be able to get past the people. Different policies led to different people's hearts. Compared to Yang Xie, there were too many loopholes. No matter how hard Bao lied and a lip worked, no matter how good their policies were, when it came to the implementation of the policies, it was completely different. The people still did not have real benefits. Without food to eat, what could they do if they did not rebel? But no matter what, they were still citizens under their rule. If they really fell out with them, they would only lose their own strength. This was what gave Bao lied and a lip a headache. The people were their roots, but now they had become their enemy. At this moment, the two of them regretted it. If they had known this would happen, they would have been nicer to the commoners, or at least moved them into the city. This was all their fault for underestimating the power of the common people. They thought that these people were just a pile of loose sand, and wouldn't be able to do much. We have to save them, and we have to kill the civilians as well. After hesitating for a long time, King Bao Lied finally made up his mind. Hearing this decision, Prime Minister Alipu's body trembled. He knew that the worst result was coming. It was hard to imagine what would happen if all the civilians were killed. Even if they won the war, there would be no civilians in the future. How could they talk about the country's development? But at this moment he really couldn't stop it because he knew that based on the current situation, this decision was undoubtedly the correct one. Now that he had made up his mind, things were much easier. Next, he ordered Wu Liji to lead the 80,000 cavalrymen out of the city to rescue Gonglu County. If the commoners didn't retreat, they were to kill them. Wu Liji obeyed the order and left. It was only a distance of 200 li, and for the cavalrymen, it would only take them half a day. As soon as their vanguard army left the inner city, the scouts of the First Army of the non-humankind discovered them and quickly sent the news back. Military commander? 80,000 cavalrymen. I'm afraid we won't be able to defeat them. In the temporary military tent, the 301st Regiment's commander, Tu Hai, said with a face full of worry. During this period of time, Bai Shuang had used his own methods to convince Tu Hai and the others, allowing them to fully realize that other than being a little younger, this commander in front of them was indeed outstanding in terms of personal ability. If they had to compare, he was much stronger than Commander Su Kuda. Not only Tu Hai, but the other 3 division commanders also looked at Bai Shuang. They wanted to see how this military commander would deal with this situation. That's right, we won't be able to defeat them, Bai Shuang said with a relaxed face, not blushing in the slightest. He only had 30,000 men, while the enemy had 80,000 cavalrymen. Furthermore, they were fighting on their home ground. Whether it was the logistics or the replenishment of their troops, they were not something he could compare to. Since that was the case, there was no way he could continue fighting this battle. If we can't win, then we'll retreat. Our original plan wasn't to attack the big cities anyway. Retreat. Hearing this decision, Tu Hai and the others were stunned. Obviously, this result was out of their expectations. Of course we have to retreat. Didn't Division Commander Tu already say that? If we can't win, then what are we waiting for? Order the army to prepare to retreat. Oh right, take out a portion of the silver we've obtained during this period of time, and distribute it to the commoners. Tell them that this is a reward for their hard work over the past few days. Bai Shuang chuckled. Retreating was the right thing to do. By making preparations in advance, they could ensure that they would not suffer any losses when the Yi army arrived. But when it came to giving out silver, the division commanders were confused. If they were going to retreat, then the commoners would naturally be abandoned as well. What was the point of giving them silver then? Seeing that the 4 division commanders were silent, it was clear that they could not understand. Bai Shuang knew that if he didn't explain, then everyone would not be able to get over it. Thus he said, silver is just a worldly possession. We are now marching to war. Bringing so many things will only affect our speed. Since that's the case, why don't we give half of it to the commoners? This way, they will know how good we are. So when Yi suppresses Li Dejun, what do you think they will think at that time? Oh, I understand. This is a comparison. As the invaders, we give the commoners silver. On the other hand, their army is going to slaughter the commoners. This will only cause the commoners to be even more alienated from them. It is possible that they will come looking for us. Luan Xiaojiang, the commander of the 302nd Division, said with a look of sudden realization. Yes, this is a trap. Sensei Naganabu, the commander of the 303rd Division, also spoke up. It was rare for someone of a different race to have such a thorough understanding of Han culture. Bai Shuang was very satisfied with his subordinate's performance. Then he said with a smile, all right, since everyone knows the meaning behind this, let's go make the arrangements now. The first army of the foreign races took out half of the silver they had plundered and distributed it to the commoners who were attacking the city. This received a wave of praise. In comparison, their own king had abandoned them, while the enemy had sent them silver. It was clear who was better and who was worse. Amidst the praises of the commoners, Wu Liji led the 80,000 cavalry to the outskirts of Gonglu City. What followed was a massacre of the commoners. Infantry was naturally weaker than cavalry. In addition, their weapons were not as good as the enemy's, and there was no effective organization. Very quickly, the commoners were forced to retreat. Blood flowed like a river outside the city, and more than 20,000 commoner corpses were left behind. General Wu Liji was not happy at all after winning such a battle. He didn't even know if this was a good or bad thing. However, as a general, he was just following orders. With a sigh he ordered, fortify the city. Prepare arrows, kerosene, logs, and boulders in case the enemy attacks again. Just as Wu Liji was reorganizing the defenses of Gonglu City, a piece of news spread through the entire inner country. It was said that Bao Lide was an army that didn't dare to fight against the 5-star army, and only dared to kill the commoners. Very soon, the commoners were in an uproar, and the foundation of the country was greatly shaken. At this time, the first army of the foreign races had already turned around and headed towards the west of Keetmian Mountain. There was a city called Tudarak, and it was their next target. Since they were already prepared, The army retreated safely without suffering any losses. This made Bai Shuang, the new commander, even more powerful. Currently, there were very few people in the First Army who didn't want to submit to this young commander. When the First Army of the foreign races arrived at the vicinity of Tuda Rock City, it could be imagined that there would be another one-sided slaughter. Perhaps not long after, the commoners here would be instigated by them again, and the reputation of the Five-Star Army as a good army would spread very quickly here. In Luobu City of the Yarqiang tribe, the new 5 armies were preparing to continue their expedition. With the example of the First Army, Shi Wanshan followed suit and used the local commoners to bribe and make use of them. Moreover, they were doing very well. One of the most important reasons was that they had the help of the surrendered general, Aleifu. This was definitely a great weapon. As a general of the Yarqiang tribe, Aleifu was very familiar with the situation here. After Shi Wanshan and Ning Wenfeng had a discussion, they put Aleifu in an important position and allowed him to establish an army. With the support of the new 5 armies, a puppet army was quickly established, and its members were constantly expanding. This time, they were able to successfully take down Luobu City, and this puppet army played a very important role in it. After taking down the city, they opened the granary, and all the puppet army, including their families, were able to eat and save a lot of food. Suddenly receiving so many benefits out of nowhere, it was natural for a person's mentality to change easily. Compared to working hard for many years and still having to live a poor life, now that they could have enough to eat and wear, this also aroused the greed in the hearts of many people. The number of the puppet army increased, and in just a few days, it surpassed the number of the new 5 armies, reaching a huge number of 40,000. Chapter 13-17. Araf regained control of the military power. These were all given to him by the 5-Star Army. This made him very excited, and at the same time he felt even more loyal. With his full cooperation and the people wanting to get better benefits, the new 5-Star Army led them all the way south and went straight to the next target, Chitai City. It could be imagined that it wouldn't take long for the entire Yarqiang tribe to fall into chaos under the suppression of the 2 armies. Perhaps at that time, the 5-Star Army's main force would be able to solve all the problems here. Compared to the results and victories of the First Army and the new 5-Star Army, Yang Qindong's main force of the 5-Star Army had just taken down the Iron Gate Pass and was confronting the Aries dynasty from afar. This time, the Aries dynasty was entrusted by the 3 countries to help. They sent a total of 150,000 soldiers, including 100,000 cavalry and 50,000 infantry. When Yang Qindong heard the news, he was speechless. Although the Great Ming Empire was known for its vast land and abundant resources with a large population, its financial resources were not as strong as outsiders thought. At least in the area of war horses, it was seriously lacking. Just like the 100,000 Liaodong iron cavalry, it was also built by Bai Ming at a great cost. If the Great Ming Empire had an inexhaustible supply of war horses, in addition to their powerful logistical support, wouldn't they be able to easily build an army of 1,000,000 soldiers? If that was the case, not to mention people looking for trouble with them, it would already be extremely fortunate if those foreign races didn't come looking for trouble. Just from this point alone, it could be seen how important war horses were to a country. This time, the Aries dynasty sent 100,000 cavalry. It was said that some of the elite divisions had 2 horses per person. This number made Yang Qindong instantly jealous. Today Yang Xie was very powerful. Whether it was territory, population, or wealth, it could definitely make any forces and countries look up to it. But in the area of war horses, it was still seriously lacking. This naturally had a lot to do with the continuous increase in the number of soldiers of the 5-Star Army. But didn't it mean that the foundation of the 5-Star Army was still too weak? Now that there were more than 100,000 war horses in front of him, it would be strange if Yang Qindong wasn't tempted. Just as he was thinking about how to deal with the Aries dynasty's army, he received a telegram from Tiger's Mane. It recorded in detail that Bai Ming's Liaodong Iron Cavalry had harassed the transport convoy and the immigrants. A group of villains. Beta Persei looked annoyed after reading the telegram. Yang Qindong's expression as he fell into deep thought. He had his own ideas on how to solve the problem between himself and the North and South Great Ming. Considering his goals and ideals, he first rejected the idea of heavy losses empire and Beiming himself. In the future, the Han people would become the rulers of the entire world. If their population was too small, it would not work. If the population was too small, he couldn't do something that would harm his own strength. At this moment, the Han people of Beiming Empire had long been regarded by Yang Qindong as his own people. Even if he lost a person for no reason, he would feel heartache. It was a pity that very few people would be able to understand his way of thinking. Perhaps in the eyes of many people in the Great Ming Dynasty, especially those from the imperial family, and the so-called well-read people who wanted to gain benefits, he was an anomaly. He was someone who wanted to usurp the throne. How difficult would it be to make these people surrender to him without shedding a drop of blood on their swords? The revolution had not succeeded yet. Comrade, you still need to work hard. For his great ideals, Yang Qindong would not retreat even if he knew that there was a bottomless abyss in front of him. He firmly believed that as long as he did something, there was a possibility of success. And he was now on the path to success. Since you took the initiative to provoke us, you must pay the price. Send a telegram to Tiger's Mane, and tell him to act like an army attacking the city and force Shiheng to hand over the people. Tell them to hand over 1 million Han people. Otherwise, we will break through Tulu City and kill our way to Beiming's capital. Send a telegram to Yangtze and have his logistics division fully cooperate. Yang Qindong said firmly. 1 million. Hearing this request, Beta Persei took a deep breath and said worriedly, I'm afraid they won't agree to this request, right? They definitely will. Yang Qindong's lips curled into a smile. No one understood the system of the Great Ming Dynasty better than him. At this moment, the Northern Ming Dynasty was in a weakened state and was no match for the five-star army. He could see this logic clearly, and Zhu Qiyu could also see it clearly. In order to protect his position, he could only agree. In a country where military power was dominated by literature, the emperor was number 1, the important officials and clans were number 2, the other civil officials and scholars were number 3, and the generals were number 4. As for the commoners at the bottom of the hierarchy, they didn't even have a place. However, paying such a price could indeed temporarily protect his safety. Yang Qindong believed that Zhu Qiyu knew how to choose. And even if he didn't want to choose, others would help him make the choice. Yang Qindong's face was full of confidence. He wanted to use this method to nibble away at Beiming's strength. It was like boiling a frog in warm water. One day, when the other party reacted, they would realize that they had no commoners to use, no army to send, and no people to recruit. At that time, it would be time to seize the fruits of victory without shedding a drop of blood. There was another important factor that prompted Yang Qindong to make this decision. As Qiqian City continued to grow, as Yangtze's territory continued to expand, as the five-star army's military strength increased, the Han people that he could use were insufficient. Just like in some of the secret factories in Qiqian City, as electricity was popularized and used, production lines were built one after another with the help of the technological books he took out. New factories also sprouted up like bamboo shoots after a rain, and all of them began to lack manpower. This forced Yang Qindong to think of other ways. In his opinion, it wasn't a big deal for some knowledge to be learned by the Han people. Even if he grew old one day and his descendants didn't live up to expectations, the ones who grasped this knowledge and power would definitely be the Han people. This way, even if they split and merged, in the end, the meat would still be in the pot, and would not be taken advantage of by other countries. With this thought in mind, he dared to use the Han people even if they were a little stupid. Using this opportunity to bring in 1 million people, it should be able to greatly alleviate the development of Qiqian City. With Yang Qindong's confident tone, Beta Persei naturally wouldn't doubt it. After agreeing, he went to the telegraph room. Yang Qindong's gaze once again landed on the sand table in front of him. After a while, his magnetic voice sounded out. Men, inform the 4th Regiment Commander Ling Daqiang to make a trip here. With a gold star on his shoulder, Ling Daqiang quickly appeared in front of Yang Qindong. As the Cold Vanguard Division, Yang Chendong favored him the most and invested the most in firearms division. At the beginning of the year, all of them were promoted from senior colonel to major general. This also represented the promotion of their status and importance in the military. Sixth young master, Ling Daqiang, is here to report. Ling Daqiang gave a standard military salute and stood on the spot with his chest puffed out. Very good. Yang Chendong, who was born in the military, looked at Ling Daqiang with satisfaction, then waved his hand and the two of them came to the sand table. Yang Chendong pointed at the Chengdo slope in front of the Iron Gate and said, "See here, a total of 150,000 Aries dynasty troops, 100,000 cavalry and 50,000 infantry. How about it? Do you have the confidence to give them a good fight?" Division Commander Ling Daqiang only had a little more than 8,000 people. It was impossible for Ling Daqiang to not be afraid of dealing with an army of 150,000 people. But since it was Yang Chendong's request, Ling Daqiang didn't hesitate and said, "Sixth young master, please give the order. I promise to complete the mission." Very good. What Yang Chendong wanted was this undiscounted attitude. Of course, he also knew that it was impossible to make all the enemies stay, so he just said to give the enemy a good fight. As for how to do it, he already had a plan in mind. Division Commander Ling, let the troops prepare. In 2 days, the individual rocket launchers and 20,000 grenades will be sent by the logistics department. After that, the armed forces will be ready to launch an attack in 3 days. Any questions? This was where Yang Chendong's confidence came from. After years of hard work, the rocket launcher lathe was finally successfully developed and started operating before the end of the year. Although it was far from being comparable to the ones in the future, one lathe could already produce 200 shells a day. With a total of 2 lathes, it was equivalent to producing 400 shells a day. This time, they had transported 5,000 shells at once, which was enough to deal with the current situation. As for the wooden grenades, they didn't require much technology. As long as the ratio of gunpowder was right, it was easy to install. This time, 20,000 pills were shipped over as well. They would continue to appear in an endless stream to ensure that the 5-star army would be able to provide powerful firepower support. This was the experience that Yang Chendong summarized from the Battle of Botiangang. Facing a small group of cavalry, the use of firearms was very limited. It wasn't impossible to use them, but it was too wasteful and not worth it. But facing the enemy's army, there wasn't much of a problem. Yang Chendong had already decided that in the future, whenever he encountered a large number of enemies, he would use firearms. This way, not only would he be able to seize territory faster, he would also be able to reduce his casualties. Compared to the cost of weapon materials, he would be able to save a lot of money on compensation for the soldiers. So why not? Originally, Ling Daqiang didn't have much confidence, but the order was given by Yang Chendong, so even if he couldn't do it, he still had to do it. Now that he heard that there were rocket launchers and grenades as support, he was naturally full of confidence. When he faced Yang Chendong again, his voice was a bit louder as he replied, "I promise to complete the mission." Chapter 13-18. Under Yang Chendong's orders, the 4th Division was ready for battle. The other armies, divisions, and regiments also received different missions. They were just waiting for the cannon to sound and the enemy to fall into chaos. In comparison, the 150,000-strong Aries dynasty army was still dreaming. Due to its geographical location, the Aries dynasty's people were valiant, especially their cavalry. After all, the influence of the grassland cavalry was still there, and it was not at its weakest yet. While their military was strong, their economic strength was too weak. As nomads, other than herding, they robbed. As for production and construction, they were still in the embryonic stage. Strictly speaking, they had just gained consciousness and had not done anything yet. It was because of this that they needed to rob to get what they needed. Just like food, they had been relying on robbing to survive. Now they could finally change their method, which was to demand. Since they had sent troops to help Ili Bali and Yirkiang, previously, they had also included the Turpan kingdom. The benefits were a must. just like how the three countries had promised that as long as the Aries dynasty sent troops, their food would not be a problem, and they would take care of it. When the Aries dynasty saw that this was a good opportunity to increase their income, and wanted to get a share of the pie, Turpan had already been wiped out. Ilibanli and Yirkiang had also split up their troops because of the five-star kingdom, causing them to be unable to take care of themselves. Instead, the Aries dynasty had become a scattered army that no one cared about. This result was naturally not satisfactory, especially the leading general Dadar. Before he left, he had promised King Yuzonghasan that he would bring back more food and other spoils of war. However, now that he had become an existence that no one cared about, he had been suppressing his anger for a long time. In the tent, Dadar angrily said to his two deputies, Nizam and Nurahan, "Send more scouts to inform the other two countries. Tell them that if they do not send more food, we will retreat. At that time we will let the five-star army occupy this region, and they will have nothing." Yes. The two generals immediately lowered their heads and answered. When he raised his head, Ridhar's expression was much better. "How is it? What's the reaction of the five-star army?" "Yes, they have been mobilizing their troops for the past 2 days. However, due to the large number of enemy scouts, our scouts were unable to follow them too closely. We do not know where they are going, but I think they should be prepared." Nurahan reported everything he knew in detail. From his attitude, one could see that he was very professional and very careful. After talking for a while, he saw that Durdle was only listening with his eyes squinted. Durdle didn't express his opinion. After thinking for a while, he carefully said, "General, according to my opinion, the five-star army will make a big move this time. Should we retreat a bit, and maintain enough distance between the two sides?" "Retreat? Retreat to where?" This time, before Ridhar could speak, Nizam spoke first. "The distance between the two sides is now 20 li. This is enough to act as a buffer between the two armies. Even if the enemy wants to make a move, we have enough time to make arrangements. Furthermore, I don't think the five-star army will take the initiative to attack us. This kind of mutual destruction is not something they want to see." Speaking of this, Nizam had a smug look on his face. He had seriously analyzed the strength of both sides. Although the five-star army was strong, they only had about 200,000 soldiers. Even if they added in the miscellaneous troops, they would still have less than 300,000 soldiers. Adding in the Ili tribe and Yirkiang tribe, they had a total of 500 to 600,000 soldiers. This was twice the number of the enemy. Furthermore, they had the home ground advantage. He couldn't think of any possibility of losing. Just the 150,000 soldiers on his side was already a tough bone. The enemy's five-star army was even weaker than his side. What would they use to attack? Was this a joke? Nizam was very confident, and this affected Ridhar as well. Ridhar was also very optimistic as he said, "That's right, this general thinks so too. The five-star army doesn't have the appetite to eat us. They are just bluffing. There's no need to pay attention to them. Just let them do what they want." Seeing that the two generals didn't care, Nuerahan was a little worried and wanted to say something. But the 100,000 Kazakh soldiers were wiped out by the five-star army. "We can't just let them. Enough." Seeing that Nuerahan was still talking, Ridhar's face darkened. "That's because they underestimated us. Botian Mound's terrain isn't suitable for an army to spread out. Our Changdo slope is completely different. Our terrain here is wide and there are many high slopes around us. As long as we form a triangle formation, they won't be able to take advantage of us." In this battle, Daradar's confidence was largely due to the terrain they were in. Changdo slope was 30 li long and a few dozen li wide. There were many high slopes around it, and they were all occupied by their army. It could be said that as long as the five-star army dared to attack here, they would be able to take the lead. If the cavalry on the ground cooperated with them, they might not be able to return alive, but they would definitely be able to heavily injure them. Yes, Nuerahan still wanted to say something, but after being reprimanded by Ridhar, he shut his mouth. Although he felt that there was no problem with his arrangements, he didn't know why, but he was very anxious. He felt like something bad was going to happen. Alright, all of you are dismissed. Take care of your own army. What we need to do now is to stay put and not move. We can stop the 5-star army's main force from acting rashly. This will be a great merit. Whether it is Ili or Yi Erqiang, they will have to obediently send us rations and satisfy our demands. Ridhar said with a cold smile. He had a plan in his mind. Unless there was no other choice, he wouldn't make an enemy out of the 5-star army. He would just wait here and continue to collect rations from the two countries. He would then send them back to his own country to solve the problem of food for the Aries dynasty. Without spending a single soldier, he would be able to reap so many benefits. No matter how he looked at it, it was a great merit. As for whether the 5-star army would really attack, he wasn't afraid. With 150,000 soldiers, if the 5-star army really wanted to attack, he wouldn't mind showing them his power. He would let them know that the 5-star army wasn't invincible in this place. 2 days had passed. Hundreds of carriages and mules appeared in the main camp under the protection of the 2nd Legion. In order to ensure the safety of these cannons and grenades, the 2nd Legion's commander Niu Duo personally escorted them, along with the 305th and 306th regiments. With such a formation, even if they met with a surprise attack, they would still have the ability to retaliate. After the goods were handed over, the cannons and grenades as well as 50 individual rocket launchers were sent to the 4th Regiment's commander. Niu Duo then went to the main camp and reported to Yang Qindong. The report was true, but so was the attack mission. As soon as Niu Duo entered the camp, he sensed the aura of a great battle. Bai Shuangjing, who was also a commander of the alien army, led the first army of the alien race to cause a ruckus, as if Sun Wukong had entered Princess Ironfan's stomach. Niu Duo's 2nd army could only be responsible for the protection of logistics. The huge difference made him feel very unfair. Bai Shuang was Yang Qindong's student. This was something that Niu Duo could not compare to. Therefore, he usually endured it and did not say anything. But this time, since he had caught up, he would not sit at the side and be a spectator no matter what. He also wanted to attack. He wanted to obtain military merits for the 2nd Legion. In the main tent, Niu Duo, who still had the rank of senior colonel, walked in after asking for instructions. Yang Qindong was sitting on a chair, drinking tea and reading the new issue of the Yang Report in the first city. He looked very leisurely. This made Niu Duo happy. Yang Qindong was in a good mood. This was a good sign. He quickly took 2 steps forward and came in front of Yang Qindong. He gave a standard military salute and said, "Reporting to the 6th young master, Niu Duo of the 2nd Legion is here to report on his work. Please give your instructions." As soon as Niu Duo entered the tent, Yang Qindong saw him. He did not greet him because he thought that there was no need. This commander was personally appointed by him, which was enough to prove that he thought highly of this person. Since he was one of his own people, why was there a need to be polite? Seeing that Niu Duo was standing there so upright, Yang Qindong put down the newspaper in his hand and said with a smile, "Commander Niu, come and sit." "Thank you, 6th young master, for giving me a seat." Niu Duo replied mechanically. Then he carefully went to the stool beside Yang Qindong and sat down. Even if he sat down, it might not be as comfortable as standing. He could only lean his butt against the stool and look like he would stand up at any time. It looked a little tiring. After noticing Niu Duo's uncomfortable sitting posture, the corners of Yang Qindong's mouth curled up slightly, revealing a smile. "All right, there are no outsiders here. Make yourself at home." As he spoke, he pushed the fruit plate in front of him forward. On the fruit plate, there were paper-wrapped candies, peanuts, melon seeds, and cigarettes. It was quite sumptuous. Niu Duo opened his mouth and revealed a somewhat unnatural smile. Then he carefully took the Bugnam of Gojosian brand cigarettes and handed one to Yang Qindong. He also took one for himself. Yang Qindong conveniently took the cigarette. Niu Duo had already lit the match and had a look of regret on his face. All of these were created by Yang Qindong. They were all amazing inventions. Anyone who saw them would be shocked. Chapter 1319. With the help of Niu Duo's lit match, Yang Chendong lit his cigarette and took a light puff. He said casually, "How was it? Did the journey go smoothly?" Reporting to the sixth young master, it went very smoothly. Knowing the importance of this batch of supplies, our outsider's second army sent 2 divisions to escort them. No one was blind enough to have any ideas about them. When it came to serious matters, Niu Duo straightened his body again. "Good, be at ease, be at ease." Yang Chendong nodded. "Did you know that Baiming attacked the logistics team?" "Yes, I heard. They are really bold." Sixth young master, this subordinate requests for battle. Please allow our outsider's second army to attack Tulu City and teach the Baiming army a lesson. Niu Duo's face was full of anger when he spoke about this matter. He only hated the fact that the other party didn't attack him. Otherwise, he would definitely teach them a lesson. Not for the time being. Yang Chendong's expression was also somewhat angry. "I have already sent a telegram to Tiger's Mane and told him to negotiate with Baiming. If they don't compensate, then beat them up. Yes, if they don't listen, then beat them until they listen." Niu Duo also said in agreement. He was also born in the Great Ming Dynasty and was previously a centurion in the Great Ming Dynasty's army. However, when it came to Baiming, he didn't hesitate at all. From this, it could be seen that he was now completely integrated into the 5-star army. In the 5-star army, the respect given to generals and soldiers was definitely not something the Great Ming Dynasty could compare to. In the Great Ming Dynasty, where the emperor and the scholar officials ruled the world together, using literature to suppress military force was the mainstream. Martial artists were also seen as brute men who only knew how to be brave and had no social status at all. Unlike in Yangxia, whether it was a general or a soldier, everyone was respected. As long as you had the ability, you would be given a platform to display your skills. There would not be any unfair treatment. This was also the reason why Yangxia was able to attract so many talents to come here. Niu Duo's face turned red at the thought of a platform for his performance. He stammered, "Sixth young master, is there going to be a big battle?" Logically speaking, this question was a bit abrupt. This was already a military secret. If Yang Chendong was not willing to talk about it, no one could pry into it. However, Niu Duo was the commander of an army after all. He was also someone that Yang Chendong trusted and thought highly of. Moreover, this was a private occasion, so it was not a nuisance to ask. "Yes, we are going to attack the Aries dynasty's army." Yang Chendong did not intend to hide it. After all, the military action plan had been made long ago. Some cavalry troops had already begun to move to the planned position yesterday. There was no harm in telling Niu Duo now. Sure enough, they were going to attack. Niu Duo immediately became excited. He reached out to put out the cigarette and asked eagerly, "Sixth young master, do we have any mission for the second army of the foreign race?" Yang Chendong only knew Niu Duo's intention at this time. He could not help but laugh out loud. When Yang Chendong laughed, Niu Duo became a little nervous. He was afraid that his request would be rejected, so he hurriedly said, "Sixth young master, our second army has 2 main divisions this time. We can also share the attack mission. Besides, Commander Bai and the others have been performing meritorious deeds. Commander Bai referred to Bai Shuang, the commander of the first army of the foreign race. Niu Duo mentioned him and asked Yang Chendong to give them a chance. They couldn't always watch others eat meat while they couldn't even drink soup. Originally, Yang Chendong did not have the intention to attack the second army of the foreign race. It was also because they were not present when the plan was made. But now that the weapons had arrived, and there were 2 main divisions with more than 10,000 people, it would be a waste if he did not use them. Besides, Bai Shuang had been performing meritorious deeds. It was not good to let Niu Duo and the others watch from the side. It was not good for the morale of the army. Considering these reasons, Yang Chendong finally nodded and said, "Okay, follow me to the sand table to take a look." This meant that he agreed. Niu Duo was overjoyed. He hurriedly got up and followed Yang Chendong to the sand table. The weather in June on the grassland had a thin layer of mist in the morning, indicating that the weather would be good today. The 5-star army had breakfast at 5 a.m. At 5:30 a.m., the various armies began to move. Under the protection of the Liaodong Cavalry Division, Light Cavalry Regiment and Reconnaissance Regiment, the 4th Infantry Division moved out and rushed towards the Aries dynasty's camp 20 miles ahead. This movement was noticed by the scouts and immediately reported back to the army. This shocked Lidar, who had just woken up and was still thinking about where to go for a stroll. Nizam and Nuerahan, who received the news, rushed to the main tent. At this moment, Lidar was already sitting on a large chair. His calm face did not reveal what he was thinking. "General, the 5-star army has moved. They are rushing towards us," Nuerahan reported softly. "I know. What are you panicking for? This is just the 5-star army's probing. I have already notified the entire army to be on alert." In this short period of time, Lidar had calmed down a lot. Although the 5-star army's actions were indeed a little out of his expectations, he didn't panic at all when he thought about how he had made sufficient preparations beforehand. After comforting himself, he sent his General Nuerahan to the front line, and another General Nuerahan to contact the armies on the nearby mountains to get them to prepare for battle. Nuerahan received the order and went to the front line. A total of 10,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry came out in battle armor. The Aries dynasty's army was not wealthy. The so-called armor was nothing more than a black-gray leather waistcoat, which did not provide much protection. However, the 20,000 people were still in formation, giving off a feeling of elite soldiers. Nuerahan climbed up a wooden tower that was 10 meters tall and personally stood on the platform. He held a red and yellow flag in his hands. This was the command flag. It could be used as a clairvoyant to command the armies on the nearby mountains to cooperate with the army. Everything was ready and waiting for the enemy to appear. From his position, he could see everything that was happening on the battlefield. It was also because of this that he saw a scene that would shock him for the rest of his life, and he would never forget it. At 8 a.m., the 5-star army appeared 3 miles away from the Aries dynasty's army in a cloud of dust, as if they were looking for a giant. One of the neat army made up of army green was moving forward step by step. "Prepare for battle." Nuerahan saw that the 5-star army was about to enter the cavalry's attack range. He raised his sword and shouted loudly. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the 5-star army cavalry came to a halt one after another. It was like a high-speed car suddenly stopped on the highway. It was so neat. Just this action alone made Nuerahan's heart sink unconsciously. It was said that military orders were like mountains. Often a small action could be used to see the discipline and fighting strength of an army. And from the cavalry that suddenly stopped, Nuerahan had to admit that at least in the area of executing orders, the 5-star army's execution ability had surpassed the Aries army. After receiving the order, the Aries army would also act according to the order, but they would definitely not be as swift and unified as the 5-star army. It felt as if there was a bottomless abyss in front of them, and the army was standing on the edge of the cliff. While Nuerahan was sighing, the army green mixed in with the 5-star army was still moving forward. It was like a giant beast sticking out its tongue and continuously moving forward. The military uniforms of the 5-star armies were not completely uniform, especially for the cavalry. Considering that they often had to face the enemy's arrow attacks when charging, it was very difficult to protect them just by wearing the green military uniform. Yang Chendong allowed the cavalry to not wear the green uniforms and could wear armor to protect themselves. But there was a clear requirement that the armor had to be mainly black in color. This way, it would have the effect of shocking and intimidating the enemy. Therefore, as infantry, the Lung 4th Division was especially eye-catching with their green uniforms mixed in with their black armor. When the soldiers of the Lung Vanguard moved forward in an orderly manner and silently moved forward, it would often give people the feeling of a sharp sword being unsheathed and slashing forward. These are infantry? General Nizam was riding on a tall horse. He looked at the army of soldiers approaching slowly with a puzzled look on his face. If the 5-star army really wanted to attack, shouldn't they send out cavalry? Only cavalry could borrow the momentum of the horse to launch a charge and achieve the greatest effect of breaking the enemy. This was the advantage of cavalry. The man borrowed the momentum of the horse, and the blade borrowed the momentum of the wind. Only in this way could they be invincible. But what was the meaning of sending out infantry? Was it really just a probing move? Nizam's heart was filled with doubts. This was the first time he saw such a tactic and he couldn't understand it. He raised his head to look at the high platform and wanted to see what Nurahan would say. At this moment, Nurahan also had a confused expression. How could this not be the first time he saw such a tactic? Usually, when two armies fought, no matter which side had cavalry, they would immediately launch an attack to ensure that the cavalry had the greatest advantage. Only those who were weak and didn't have cavalry would be forced to send out infantry to fight the cavalry. Usually, doing so would require them to pay a huge price. This was the most simple logic. It was like 1 + 1 = 2. Nurahong didn't believe that the 5-star army didn't understand this. If this was the case, they wouldn't have destroyed the Turpan kingdom. They wouldn't be invincible here. The more he understood this logic, the more confused he was about the 5-star army's cavalry stopping and the infantry advancing. Nurahan decided to wait. Firstly, he wanted to see what tricks the 5-star army was going to play. Secondly, he wanted to wait until they were at the most suitable distance to inform the cavalry to attack. Then, they would charge into the infantry and obtain victory first. Chapter 13:20. Nizam decided to wait and see, as Nurahan did not give any orders. He did not necessarily have to listen to this person, but since he had no ideas, he hoped to learn from the other person's opinion. As expected, the Ares army did not make any moves. Ling Daqiang, the commander of the 4th Division, had a flash of joy in his eyes. At this moment, he remembered what Yang Qindong said to him last night. The army should move forward boldly. This is our first battle with the Ares army. They will not act rashly before they understand our intentions. At that time, Ling Daqiang, who believed these words without a doubt, made a promise on the spot. The cold warriors were not afraid of any enemy and could complete the task of quickly suppressing the enemy. At that time, his attitude was firm, but when he really came to the battlefield, it was impossible to say that Ling Daqiang's heart did not beat like a drum. After all, this was a battlefield, especially one with tens of thousands of people. Only his army was constantly moving forward while the others were still looking at him. That kind of nervousness could not be described with words. Dachang was even prepared to deal with the enemy as soon as they launched an attack. But now, it seemed that Yang Qindong was farsighted and predicted the enemy like a god. The enemy did not make any moves. This made his confidence soar, and his steps forward became even more firm. 2 li 1.5 li 1 li. Finally, when they were 1 li away from the Ares army, Ling Daqiang's loud voice rang out. Halt, prepare for battle. 1 li was the limit of the cavalry's charge. If they were any closer, the cavalry would not be able to use their charging advantage. In other words, if they were to move forward, it would be equivalent to provoking the Ares army and forcing them to charge immediately. The same distance of 1 li was also the result of Yang Qindong's estimation. At this distance, as long as the 4th Division was prepared for battle, regardless of whether it was cavalry or infantry, they would be turned into ashes and die before they could even achieve victory. The Green Army was getting closer and closer. Nizam's right hand was already raised high, and he was ready to give the order to charge. But at this moment, the other party suddenly stopped moving. This made him unsure whether he should lower his right hand or retract it. Machine gunners, get ready. Rocket launchers, ready to fire. Remember to hold the grenade for 3 breaths before throwing it. Sharpshooter, make sure the enemy doesn't get within 30 meters of us. Ling Daqiang's voice rang out one after another. All of the cold vanguard warriors took their positions, each carrying out their duties. Their eyes were fixed on the enemy 500 meters away from them. This wasn't the first time such an order had been given, and it was unknown how many times they had practiced this kind of training. But seriously speaking, this was the first time he had fought in such a way on the battlefield. It was finally time for a real battle. Even the well-trained soldiers of the cold vanguard were nervous. Their hands were sweating, and their foreheads were sweating. Some of them could even feel their arms trembling. After all, a drill was a drill. No matter how realistic it was, everyone would still think that it was fake from the bottom of their hearts. It was inevitable that they would let their guard down. However, actual combat was completely different. The slightest carelessness could lead to an irreversible situation. Every warrior did not wish to have any problems or mistakes. The more he was like this, the more nervous he was. The more nervous he was, the easier it was for him to make mistakes. The tension in the army quickly spread. As the commander, Ling Daqiang naturally felt it. He knew that he had to do something at this moment. Men, bring me the gun. A JS-12. 7mm sniper rifle that had been polished until it was shiny was handed over to him. Ling Daqiang, who stood at the very front and was like a stabilizing force, sucked in a deep breath. Then, he raised his gun and aimed at the enemy flag bearer 500 meters away. He originally thought that the enemy would charge after he stopped moving. However, it seemed that the enemy was frightened, or perhaps they wanted to see him continue his performance. Ling Daqiang had no choice but to take the initiative. He wanted to fire the first shot. He wanted to use the sound of the gunshot to dispel the nervousness of the cold vanguard warriors. He wanted to use the gun to announce that the cold vanguard warriors would always be the strongest elite of the 5-star army. Following the 4th Master Lu's sudden stop, the earth seemed to have stopped moving. The 5-star army did not move. They were waiting for Ling Daqiang's shot to start the battle. The Ares army did not move. They wanted to continue watching what the 5-star army was going to do. At a distance of 1 li, they were confident that a cavalry charge would be able to wipe out the thousands of infantrymen of the 5-star army. The wind also seemed to have stopped at this moment. It seemed to have sensed something, or perhaps it was anticipating something. The only one who moved was Ling Daqiang. He raised his gun and controlled the speed of his heartbeat to gradually maintain a stable state. Then he took a deep breath, exhaled and breathed again. When his body had adjusted to the calmest state, his right index finger slowly approached the trigger and moved it bit by bit. When he touched the trigger lightly and reached the state of being one with the world, the gunshot rang out. Bang! The bullet flew out of the barrel and pierced through the air. It was like an arrow leaving the bow as it shot towards the Ares army's flag bearer. The 12. 7mm sniper rifle, known as the best sniper rifle in Asia in the future, could penetrate 15mm thick alloy steel plates at a distance of 1,000 meters. After a slight tremble, the flag bearer on the opposite side reacted accordingly. The warhorse trembled violently for a moment before its body swayed and fell with a plop. Good. With a single shot, the flag bearer's head exploded from 500 meters away. This shot caused the cold vanguard soldiers standing behind him to cheer loudly. Good gun. Ling Daqiang was also secretly happy. This 12.7mm sniper rifle was taken from Yang Qindong yesterday afternoon. The current Crimson City's arsenal was far from being able to produce such a sharp gun. Naturally, this was taken from the warehouse by Yang Qindong. He also took out 100 sniper bullets and gave them to Ling Daqiang. Yesterday afternoon, Ling Daqiang fired 50 shots and finally familiarized himself with the gun's functions. Now that it was used, he was amazed. Killing someone 500 meters away was as easy as taking something out of his pocket. Compared to the 95 style, which had a maximum killing range of 400 meters, it was naturally much better. What a pity, this gun will have to be returned after today's battle. Ling Daqiang thought it was a pity. Then he focused on aiming at the next target. It was a Ares cavalry soldier who was wearing armor and was obviously not a leader. After a loud explosion, the flag bearer died. This scene shocked all the soldiers of the Ares army. In their eyes, the strongest weapon in the world was a strong bow. A good bow with great strength could take a person's life from 150 meters away. This person was a godly archer. Even in the Ares dynasty, there were only a few people who could do this. But what did they just see? A distance of 500 meters had been directly killed by the other party. There was no hesitation at all. This scene was completely beyond everyone's understanding. This was something that was impossible to accomplish. Now it was clearly displayed in front of everyone's eyes. If they did not see it with their own eyes, no one would dare to believe it was real. Bang! Another gunshot rang out, and another centurion was shot dead. However, this shot was slightly off. It hit the shoulder, but it still shattered the shoulder blade. The centurion fell from the horse and was about to die from excessive blood loss. Bang bang bang. De Chong gradually got used to the 12.7mm sniper rifle's performance and also liked this method of killing. He kept pulling the trigger, and one after another fell from the horse, becoming a ghost under the gun. In the short span of a dozen breaths, a flag bearer, 5 centurions, and a chiliarch had been killed on their horses. This also allowed Nizam, who was leading the team, to regain his senses. He immediately shouted, "Charge! Cavalry charge in front, infantry follow behind, kill all the enemies." They had no choice but to charge. Who knew if they would be the next to die if this continued? Nizam's shout was an order. The cavalry of the Aries dynasty, who were still silent under the gunfire, quickly responded. One after another, the cavalry began to gallop and rush towards Nizam. Hugh. De Chong finally put down the 12.7mm sniper rifle in his hand. De Chong's face was filled with excitement. He turned around and looked at 1st Regiment leader Gao Xiang, 2nd Regiment leader He Wen, and 3rd Regiment leader Lu Zheng. Follow the plan. Yes. The 3 regimental leaders quickly saluted and ran to their respective command posts. A distance of 500 meters could be covered in less than a minute for the cavalry. This was the time when the 4th Regiment was preparing. Gunners fire. After the 1st Regiment commander gave the order, concentrated gunshots started to ring out. It was as if a whirlwind had blown past and swept forward. Dozens of light machine guns and several heavy machine guns all opened fire. It was like hundreds of firecrackers were lit. The sound quickly rang out. In exchange, the charging cavalry fell one after another. The Aries dynasty cavalry were either shot or their horses were shot. However, no matter what method, the result would not change. One after another, the cavalry was killed on their horses. One after another, the cavalry fell on the charging path. Under the inertia, there were still more Aries dynasty cavalry attacking. At this time, it was no longer a question of whether they wanted to charge or not. They simply could not stop. Rocket launchers ready fire. Grenades ready throw. Chapter 1321. The commander of the 2nd Regiment, He Wen, shouted loudly. The rocket soldiers and grenade launchers under him launched their own attacks. For a moment, thunderous sounds resounded on the battlefield. Amidst the explosions, groups of Aries cavalrymen were blasted far away or torn into pieces. The battlefield was filled with smoke and the smell of flesh and blood. The commander of the 3rd Regiment was in charge of all the individual soldiers with guns. Not long after the 1st and 2nd Regiment commanders gave their orders, his voice also resounded on the battlefield. Open fire, no one is allowed to come within 20 meters of us. Attack. Dense gunshots rang out once again as thousands of soldiers opened fire in unison. Bullets filled the battlefield, forming a huge net, making it impossible for anyone to hide. There was nowhere to hide. Amidst the explosions, the Aries cavalrymen were engulfed in a sea of fire and explosions. The war horses neighed and were completely out of control. They either threw the cavalrymen on their backs to the ground, or led the cavalrymen to charge into the crowd of infantrymen beside them. Countless collisions sounded. Every collision would cause one or more Aries cavalrymen to be injured or killed. Amidst the gunshots, the Aries cavalrymen's morale was also severely damaged. In order to survive, no one thought of attacking. However, even if they wanted to escape, they had no direction. They were like headless flies, running in all directions. The miserable General Nizam of the vanguard was hit 3 times by the dense gunshots. Looking at the blood flowing out from his chest, the light in his eyes quickly dimmed. He wanted to shout out why, but he, who had already been drained of all his blood, could only move a little before falling onto the horse with a plop, forever losing all consciousness. Nizam was dead. Even if he did not die, it would not change the outcome of the battle. Under the gunshots and cannons, at least 3,000 cavalrymen were killed. Thousands of cavalrymen were injured and fell off their horses. As for the remaining thousands of cavalrymen and 10,000 infantrymen, They had already turned around and fled. What they saw today was completely out of everyone's expectations. This was not a battle at all. This was suicide. No one wanted to die, and no one wanted to die innocently. Their only choice was to flee. On the high platform, Nurahan clearly saw this scene. He even saw the scene where Nizam was killed by a spear. At this moment, his entire body was drenched in cold sweat. He finally understood why the 5-star army was able to win every battle despite their small numbers. With such powerful firearms, who could fight against them? Shock, astonishment, and fear were no longer enough to express his current thoughts. Now he just wanted to end this war quickly. If possible, he wanted to return to the Ares dynasty and never be enemies with the 5-star army again. His thoughts were in a mess until the cavalry of the 5-star army launched an attack. Only then did he regain his senses. Then, he waved the red and yellow flag in his hand. He knew that it would take time for the army to retreat. He had to mobilize the army on each mountain and let them charge forward to slow down the enemy's attack. Whether it was a counterattack or a retreat, they had to buy enough time. Within the 5-star army's camp, the cavalry charged forward. With the new army's cavalry as the lead, the cavalry of the 2nd Army's 2 divisions formed the 2nd echelon and launched the cavalry charge. What happened just now was like a nightmare for the Ares army, but to the 5-star army, it was indeed a victory that roused their morale. This was especially so for the army who didn't know much about firearms. When they saw the might of the 5-star army's firearms, they were filled with pride and excitement. At this moment, the army's morale reached its peak. When the order to charge was given, some of the cavalry's speed even caught up with the new army's 1st echelon. They couldn't wait to show off their skills on the battlefield. Charge down the mountain and stop the charging speed of the 5-star army's cavalry. The military order was like a mountain. The Ares army on the nearby mountains charged forward. It felt like a fierce tiger coming down from the mountain towards the 5-star army's cavalry from several directions. Boom, 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 boom. The 4th Division commander Yi Xingfeng had been waiting for this moment. He had been prepared to fire from the back. He had already brought the cannoneers to adjust the gauges and waited for the enemy to make a move. Now it was finally time for them to show their might. The 100mm mortar shells fell like meteors from outer space and landed in the midst of the Ares army that was charging from the foot of the mountain. Every time the cannons fired, a dozen or even more soldiers would die. Under the bombardment, the Ares army that was originally full of vigor was in a mess. Under the powerful bombardment, the Ares army was completely unprepared. They had never seen the power of such a cannon before and were stunned. They couldn't even differentiate north from south as they ran around under the bombardment. But the more they were like this, the greater the number of casualties. They didn't know that under the bombardment, lying down and not moving was the best choice. The old soldiers were afraid of guns, and the new soldiers were afraid of cannons. But to the Ares army, they were all new soldiers. They didn't know how to deal with such an attack, and how to avoid the greatest number of casualties. Under the bombardment, the so-called reinforcements became a joke. They couldn't even protect themselves and didn't even know where to run. The Ares army on the mountain was already in a mess. Using this opportunity, the 5-star army's cavalry charged to the back of the Ares army's vanguard. They used the speed of their horses and swung their swords. One by one, the Ares army fell to the ground as they wailed in pain. "It's over, it's all over." Nurahan sat down on the high platform with a plop. From his position, he could see the entire situation. Because of this, he could see the Ares army's situation the clearest. He knew better than anyone else that the Ares army had lost. The army was already in a mess. There was no need to talk about morale. How could an army like this fight? How could they win a battle? Under the bombardment of guns, the situation on the battlefield was already one-sided. The Ares army's morale fell to the bottom. While they were terrified, they didn't have the courage to turn around and fight against the 5-star army. They only wanted to escape. The further the better. It would be best if they didn't let the 5-star army see them. In comparison, the 5-star army's morale was at its peak. They shouted loudly as they galloped on the battlefield on their horses. They chased and killed batch after batch of defeated Ares soldiers. They were having a great time. The vanguard was defeated. 10,000 cavalry and 10,000 infantrymen were killed, one surrendered, and one escaped. There were originally 30,000 Ares army soldiers on each mountain. However, under the bombardment of the cannons, they didn't even have the chance to use half of their combat power before they were defeated and escaped. The mountains were filled with deserters. Their weapons were also abandoned everywhere. It was a miserable scene. In the main tent of the Ares army, scouts rushed in one after another and reported the situation of the vanguard 8 miles away. When bad news came one after another, Ridhar's expression changed from the initial calm to anger. Then his whole body started to tremble and his eyes lost their luster. This 5-star army is so powerful. What should we do? What should we do? Seeing that Deridar was at his wit's end, the expressions of the generals around him changed. The army couldn't do without a leader. But now that the leader was panicking, what should they do? General, let's escape now. The 5-star army's cavalry is only 5 miles away. Escape? Riddle instinctively shook his head. We can't leave. We are only the vanguard. The main force of the army is still here. Yes, this time, the Ares dynasty sent a total of 150,000 troops. Now only the 10,000 cavalry and 40,000 infantry of the vanguard lost the battle. They still had 110,000 troops in their hands. With this, they could fight any powerful enemy in a battle. Reporting. Just as Ridhar shook his head, another scout rushed into the tent. The moment he entered the tent, this young general didn't even dare to raise his head as he cried out. Reporting to the general, we have discovered a large number of 5-star army cavalry on our left and right. They are currently moving towards us. 5-star army's cavalry on our left and right. What are our soldiers doing? Another piece of bad news came. Riddle was furious when he heard it. He roared loudly as if he wanted to eat someone. The scout was already scared to the point of kneeling on the ground. He didn't dare to explain anything. Fortunately, there were other generals who spoke. General, our soldiers on the mountain were scattered by the cannons of the 5-star army. At this moment, Riddle finally came back to his senses. After 2 breaths, he let out a long sigh and said, "What the hell is going on? Those cannons are really that powerful. Is the heavens trying to destroy our army? General, let's just retreat. The morale of the army is in chaos. It's not a good time to fight the 5-star army. Why don't we retreat first and think of a plan?" Seeing how Riddle was still depressed about the loss of the war, the other captains became anxious. Even if Riddle wanted to die, they didn't want to. However, if they escaped without a military order, they would be beheaded even if they returned to the Ares dynasty. Thus, they had to convince Riddle. Ridhar, who had long run out of ideas, looked at the generals requesting for retreat, and knew that even if he wanted to continue fighting, there would not be any results. The morale of the army was at rock bottom. There was no need to continue fighting. Okay, retreat, retreat. Inform the vanguard to set up defenses, and by time for our main force to retreat. Helplessly, despite the unwillingness in his heart, Ridar had no choice but to give such an order. Chapter 1322. The Ares dynasty's army retreated. Without any preparation, they didn't even have time to tidy up their tents. Many of the military supplies were left behind as well. Thus, Ridhar only managed to escape with 50,000 cavalrymen, 150,000 soldiers, 50,000 cavalrymen, and 50,000 infantrymen. A small number of them died in the cannon fire and cavalry attacks. Nizam and the other generals died in battle. 70,000 people were captured, including Nurahan and the others. At the same time, they also seized a large amount of food, military equipment, and war horses. From the reports of the scouts and light cavalry that pursued the Ares dynasty, Ridhar escaped with 50,000 cavalrymen for hundreds of thousands of miles until they left the Ely region and returned to the Ares dynasty's territory. The victory was decided in one battle. It was carried out in an unstoppable manner without the slightest hesitation. The battle from the beginning to the end took less than 2 days. It ended with the 5-star army's complete victory. In the main tent of the 5-star army, Nurahan knelt on the ground with his hands tied. Opposite him was Yang Chendong, who was sitting there drinking tea and reading the battle report. In this battle, the 5-star army used firearms to open the way. The enemy's army collapsed and their morale was at an all-time low. In the end, they only lost less than 500 cavalrymen to achieve a great victory. As the Aries dynasty's army retreated from the battlefield, it could be imagined that the 5-star army would have no opponents in the future. It was only a matter of time before they conquered this place. The result of the battle report made Yang Chendong in a good mood. When he looked at the kneeling Nurahan, his tone was not very strict. This king asks you, if the 5-star army enters the Aries dynasty, can you resist? Nurahan, whose hands were tied behind his back, was already scared out of his wits. Or rather, he was completely shocked by the 5-star army's firearms. Now that he heard Yang Chendong's question, he shook his head without hesitation. I can't. This result made Yang Chendong even more satisfied. Good, you can be considered a sensible person. Since that's the case, are you willing to go back and persuade your comrades to surrender? You have to know that this is not only an opportunity for you, but also an opportunity for the Aries dynasty. Otherwise, when the 5-star army enters the Aries dynasty, they will win easily. At that time, who knows how many more people will die? This was the reason why Yang Chendong called Nurahan. If they could take over the Aries dynasty without bloodshed, of course, it would be for the best. Even if he couldn't achieve it, letting Nurahan leave would also make him a troublemaker. At that time, even if he could only persuade a small number of people to surrender, it would be a good thing. Nurahan to the Aries dynasty was to survive to survive. Or to the Aries dynasties to the Aries dynasty. When he thought of the power of the 5-star firearms, and the fact that he didn't want to see his country's citizens and army being slaughtered, he wanted to do something about it. Now that the opportunity had come, there was no reason not to seize it. He immediately nodded and said, the surrendered general is willing to surrender, and is willing to persuade his comrades to surrender to the 5-star army. Such a cooperative Nurahan naturally made Yang Chendong very happy. Good, surrender to the Aries. Come, untie the general and take out 1,000,000 silver for him to use. If he has any requests, help him. Are you satisfied? Not only was his life guaranteed, but he also received 1,000,000 silver. How many things could he do? Nurahan had no reason to refuse. He knelt on the ground again and said with determination, I thank Bugnam of Gojoseon for thinking so highly of me. This time, I will do my best and go through fire and water. Good, I hope you can do what you say. If you dare to play any tricks, then when I catch you, I promise I will let you experience what it means to live a life worse than death. After giving the sweet jujube, it was time to swing the big stick. Yang Chendong's voice carried a bit of coldness. I don't dare, I don't dare. Nurahan's body shook. He believed that the 5-star army definitely had the ability to do so. He didn't want to die and didn't want to see his country's citizens die innocently. He knew that he had no other choice. Nurahan was let go just like that. Before leaving, other than writing a surrender letter, there were no other measures. Because of this, Beta Persei worriedly reminded him. It was clear that he had doubts about this person's loyalty. Don't worry, everyone knows that he was captured by us. Even if he faked his surrender, when he returns to the Aries dynasty, he won't be heavily used. Anyone with ambition wouldn't do such a stupid thing. Also, you have to have confidence in the 5-star army. This time he was already scared. Even his spine was broken. He won't dare to be our enemy. Regarding this point, Yang Chendong was 100 times more confident. Why did so many traitors appear in the future? Wasn't it because the Japanese's weapons and individual combat ability were too strong? On the other hand, the 5-star army was much stronger than the Japanese at that time. Anyone who understood would know what to do. On the other hand, if Nurahan's mentality changed, then what was the difference between killing him and not killing him? In the end, it was just a loss of 1,000,000 taels of silver. And if he persuaded more people to surrender, how could 1,000,000 taels of silver compare? He was willing to take this gamble. Yili's first army led by Bai Shuang, Yarqiang's 5-star army led by Shirwanshan. Turpan was destroyed, and the Aries dynasty and Kazakh's reinforcements were either pushed back or eliminated. The situation in this area became clearer. At this point, the 5-star army already had the upper hand. As long as they didn't make any big mistakes, taking down this area was just a matter of time. Since this was the case, Yang Qindong was prepared to let go of everything and leave everything here to his subordinates. This was a type of training for them. At the same time, Yang Qindong also needed to make a trip back to Qiqian City. Many lathes in the munitions factory were being put up. He was very worried and had to go back to take a look. This was related to the future development of Yangxia and the long-term benefits of the 5-star army. Before deciding to leave, Yang Qindong handed the military command over to the commanders of each army, division, and regiment. In their words, when he wasn't here, the generals could do whatever they wanted. This was the time to test their abilities. In order to increase the fighting power of the army, Yang Qindong even left the 4th Army Division behind. Overall, Yili and the Yarqiang tribe still had the geographical and military advantage. If there wasn't such a strong army, some things would probably go wrong. After leaving the 4th Army Division behind, Yang Qindong didn't have any firearms by his side. Fortunately, he had already sent a telegram to the army headquarters. The 5th Army Division had already set off for the first city and should arrive earlier than them. The generals who stayed behind were naturally grateful when they saw that Yang Qindong trusted them so much. This kind of trust made everyone have the mentality of dying for someone who knew them well. He left behind most of the troops and only took the 1st Cavalry Division with him. Then, under the protection of 2,000 Black Knights, he returned to the first city with the 2nd Army that was in charge of logistics and transportation. This time, when he returned to the first city, Yang Qindong still had one more thing to do, and that was to get 1 million Han people. This was the reward he asked for from Beiming for their sneak attack on him. But now it seemed that things didn't go well. Even so, he didn't mind fighting a battle and letting the other party know that it wasn't that their 5-star army didn't have the ability to defeat them, but that they just didn't want to do so. First city. At the headquarters of the new army, Tiger's Mane, Yangxi, and Yumian were sitting in a small conference room for a meeting. Yang Qindong had already made a decision on how to deal with the Beiming army's sneak attack on the supply transport team. As soon as they received the news, they reported this information to Governor Shiheng in Tulu City. However, more than a month had passed since the time of reporting, but there was still no movement from the other party. On the contrary, the 6th young master had already returned and entered the new 2nd Army Shajing City. It would take him a few days to reach the first city. There must be an explanation for this matter. Otherwise, how could they answer the 6th young master when he asked? As the most trusted people of Yang Qindong, they were also entrusted with the important task of being in charge of the specific matters of the first city. The 3 of them must give an explanation, otherwise, they would be incompetent. We still have to send someone to urge them. Give them 2 more days. There must be a result. As the first city's governor, Yumian was a scholar. In the past, he didn't think highly of generals. However, what he had seen and heard in the past few years made him clearly realize how important it was to have a powerful army. It could bring earth-shattering changes to the lives of the people. His mentality had also changed because of this. 2 days? What if the other party still doesn't reply when the time is up? Yangxi didn't seem to be satisfied with this answer. However, considering that Yu Qian and his son were talents that even the young master respected, he didn't speak so aggressively. Yu Mian, who was suddenly stumped, didn't know how to answer for a moment. Tiger's Mane, who was watching the show from the side, felt that it was about time. He said as if he was helping Yu Mian out. If they don't answer, beat them. How dare they ignore the 6th young master's words? How can we not teach them a lesson? This was the true intention of Tiger's Mane and Yangxi. To put it bluntly, they advocated using force to solve everything. However, Yu Mian had always disagreed. He always wanted to solve the problem through negotiation, so they waited and waited. Now that Yang Qindong was coming, they couldn't delay any longer. Therefore, the two of them called Yumi on to put pressure on him. After all, the first city was sending troops. If the governor didn't cooperate, there would be some trouble. Beat them. This answer was clearly out of Yumion's expectations. Although he didn't reject generals, he still didn't like fighting and killing. It would be best if he could solve the problem through negotiation. Well, should we talk to Shiheng again? If it doesn't work, we can reduce the number of people we want. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.